Yeah, I don't know. I struggled this time compared to the first time I did it. I think I'm just feeling so burnt out. Like I still get to my character in like in its next class, and I never like leave it this way. So I'm just really feeling burnt out.
I don't know if I did that right, because I remember last because on like image he has like all the notes and the words it says books. So does it mean like, well, does it just want all the boxes actively sized, or does it want like the Ferrari jaws within the box and keep the boxes? Because then, I just kept mine all boxes, but I like that 5 long. But then what I did was I made sure like I turned the boxes like the wheels into what the wheels would actually look like. I haven't like circled them, but I made sure I was like looking at the image of like how tall they were, how far they were. I think that'd be like good enough for them to go up with. Yeah.
This week I just want to get home. Just like so
As soon as bigger drones.
Yeah.
Trying to catch up.
As soon as bigger drones done tonight, hopefully. I mean, other areas will actually then have to take the plan of that.
Thinking of like going back on some more topics and like polishing and stuff off. Like
I'm hoping to do that over the break as well. Because multimedia, let's not talk about. I can't.
You're doing a lot of stuff for multimedia.
It's just like I've tried using Blender and it's just not still working out for me. So I'm just like, look, I don't know.
We have to use Blender for visual painting. Like I haven't on my laptop. I just haven't opened it yet. It's just like
It's just like, oh, it's so easy. And I'm like, that's scary. And I've like every time I've tried it, sort of to what Denver is going on, whatever tutorial I'm following, it always is different. I'm like,
yeah.
no thanks.
Did you get any feedback of the drones last week?
I actually don't really check it because
Because I don't think we like actually have been put up yet.
yeah, that's the thing. That's why I stopped checking. I'm like, oh, I thought
Yeah, barely anything that's given to us. It's just you just have to take on what we give to other people.
Yeah.
But
But
then,
sometimes I don't see my mistakes first.
yeah, that's the thing. Like I say, it's like when he does it, I tell you exactly what he does.
Yeah.
He just looks bad. I think it's only because he is he's more steady. Like me, I'm kind of like like that.
I was really just saying to the drawing as well. I was just like, look, I'm probably not the same result.
Doing the circle, doing the line.
And like whenever I do it, it just looks weird. It just looks really, really strange. Look, I don't know what I'm doing wrong.
Mine always end up
It's
really
something.
thin. I don't know why, but sometimes mine just end up looking thin.
Yes.
Yeah, same with mine. Or they end up looking like really, really big. Like, oh.
Mine's like lately I've been showing them long. I don't know why. Like, yeah, they're measuring things so off. Like, why not doing this? Also,
I do all the measuring. Like I get like the circle and I do like 4 of them. I line them all up and like that. I'm not counting that. I'm cutting exactly what I do.
I wish he would also post up his like notes and stuff he does in class. Like these stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of
I mean, you just watch back from the
Yeah, but the things like these are like a screenshot from Collaborate, but it's just a bit blurry and not that good. So I prefer these ones.
I wish I could copy the VPN to Word.
Yeah.
I think that would make things a lot easier. Or I wish they could like kind of let us know as influencers, like, I know you want to, collaborate, but it's probably easier to join a Zoom call anyway.
Yeah.
say that, like, after drone, like, if everyone's been doing their 20 by this week, everyone's probably destroying like 140, something like that,
Yeah.
of their areas. I will say that when I look at like my first rank, and the everyone that was massive.
Yeah, same.
Like when I like the first 2 weeks, especially when I was doing limbs and that, like under strength, they were also like fat and wiggly, and then like this one. This is weird. I don't know why, but the way when you start like, yeah, don't look at the arms, look at the ventral space. So when I actually started looking at the it's just much easier. That is actually not good trouble.
Just like I eat like stress eat.
I always bring like a little packet from Pix. You know, like 10 pennies.
That's a good idea, but I don't do.
I sometimes forget that, like,
Breakfast this morning, so I'm like, this is breakfast now.
but no matter what, I'll have a decent breakfast in the morning, but by the time I get here, I'm dying.
Same.
I'm dying.
It's always the way. It's like, I don't usually wake up as early as I do to get here. So it's like, oh yeah, I will eat really like breakfast, but then once I get here, I'm hungry again. It's like, what's the point of that?
I used to like have snacks like George does, but like I kind of stopped because like I don't want to like by like opening the packets
I'm
and
the
stuff.
same.
So just like
Right.
It's like,
I'll
yeah,
open
let's
the
make
bell
one.
if I have to. Then I'll hear it. What's the most noisiest food you have? I know, crunchy.
yeah, or just anything with like
Carrot. Well, like carrot sticks are really crunchy, but like also, you know, there's like ruffling packets, especially like the foil ones, are
Yes.
so bad.
I'll just sit there posted, like, you know, like, it's like the little lolly ones, and you're like, yeah, you're very much.
or like paper bags like when you get to a cafe or something. It's just like oh my
That's the
god.
worst. And you're in like, I've done that before where I've gone and got like something from the cafe, and then I've gone to sit in one of Katie's lectures, and I'm sitting there like trying to eat as quietly as I can.
Nah, I'm not a help my food.
I'm like so glad people are happy about that. I feel
I'm shocked
good.
sometimes.
I feel good about that. I don't know why. I shouldn't at all, but I feel great.
It's like that thing, like, you know, it's like, oh yeah, I only got like, when like, you know, like 10 of that, I only got 5, and I was just like, well, yeah, I don't sleep.
I was
Being
like,
that, and then you're just there like
Let's
dying in
live.
class, can't even listen, fall asleep.
Well, that'll probably be me tomorrow. Because, I can't get through.
Yeah. Figure drone. I mean, like, would you prefer doing like these figure drones, or like, you know, having like a 3-hour dedicated thing of like live drone?
I
Because
definitely
then live
miss
drone, you
laughter.
just do
I
it.
miss live drawing, that's the thing. I really like live drawing.
Same.
And I feel like this is like, I feel like figure drawing is helpful in a way, like, but in a different sense. It's helpful, it is still helpful, never would say it's not helpful, it's just in different ways. Live drawing is also helpful. But I'm like, I want to get back into live drawing, but it's so late. And it's like, I don't want to be able to be still at like, you know, 9, 10 at night. That's
Yeah.
scary to me.
They used to have them in the morning. I don't know if they still have them.
Friday
If-
morning.
If they did them Friday morning again, I'd come in, but like, doing it at night is just stupid.
Yeah.
Oh, these ones, like, 4 weeks and stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know how I'm gonna get through it. I'm just like,
I think once I
Gonna
get
push
through it,
through.
yeah.
I was thinking it'd be very like 6 months to see what I do. Maybe, I feel like maybe it would be enough to just kind of reset.
Yeah, you go like 3
Hopefully.
months.
Yeah, I'm hoping so, but like, we'll see. It's like, I'm burnt out, I'm drained.
Alright. Cheers for the bottle.
It's kind of scary how fast, like, the years are going. Like, I can't think we're in second year. Like,
About to finish it.
yeah, that's shock.
And for some, it's that final year.
That's shocking.
It's really, really weird to think about, eh?
I feel like kind of scary. Like, what am I gonna do when I finish?
It's like, am I ever gonna get a job? Like,
It's like, I need someone to tell me what to do.
please, someone just like hold my hand.
I just like don't know if I'm gonna move back to Sydney or stay here and try and find a job.
I forget that there's people from other states here as well. I forget this.
And I'm like so scared because like I don't know if I gotta move.
And it's like, I don't, so the thing is, I don't really want to have to move away to find a job, but if I have to, you know, like, I don't know. I don't know what I'm gonna do. So. And I think there's a few of you guys from like Melbourne and Sydney, and then there's like Meg from New Zealand. And I'm like, dude, that's crazy. I could never like move from so far away. I hate it. But like, yeah, I don't know. Safely, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just like,
I feel you.
I'm crazy.
The weather is so good. It's easy to get out of bed. It's a bit warm. That's why I like the warmer weather.
Like shivering, cold, and like, why am I there where I am? But start playing on the
I was like struggling to get out of bed. I know it's like my train is actually, I can stay a little longer.
It's always worth it for that like one extra minute.
I didn't go to sleep for that. I'm usually going to sleep at like 10. I didn't go to sleep till like 11, 12. So, well, not that's fine.
That's usually my time. 12 or 1, you know.
Yeah.
I always give myself.
There's people that just put it 4 a.m. I'm like, dude, go to sleep.
That's
What are
just
you
too
doing?
much.
I always give myself.
That
I mean,
scares
I am
me.
always 6 hours like that. You know,
Yeah.
6 hours is like.
Yeah.
I think it was next semester, last semester, I ended up breezing through like, I reckon about, it was good like just over 24 hours just on monster drinks and just pure caffeine.
Oh my god.
And because I was like pushing to get this shit done. And I still didn't do a great job, but I passed. Like, it kind of worked. But it was like horrendous. I felt terrible the next day, and I just like I had a 2-hour nap and that was bad. And then I slept really well. Like I reckon I slept a good 12 hours after that.
That's
it was
so good, though.
amazing.
Yeah, sometimes like if I can't fall asleep, like I'll purposely stay up and like tire myself out the
Yeah.
following day.
And
That way I can sleep better.
I feel like with that as well, it's kind of better to do that rather than try and get sleep at practice.
Yeah.
It's the same with if you're moving into like a different time zone. Like you can just like stay up there and then go to sleep the next day. Because then at least you're kind of lining up.
I remember one time I was like on a night from my family. It was like up second or third time in Bali, and I was on the plane, and I could see everyone was asleep except for me. And I could see, and I was trying to make myself go to sleep. My eye was really tired whatsoever, and I'm looking at the time, and it's like, oh yeah, I was in work. And I was like,
Nice.
yeah, because I know like why we decided to get like the night one. And then like, then everyone started to wake up when the sunrise was coming, and I was like, morning everyone. They're like, oh, how did you sleep? And I'm like, I didn't sleep. I was awake the whole time. I was playing cards with the cat. Most uncomfortable thing is like, when I sit in the seats, I'm a bit deep with it, and like, I can't do anything. That's why we made me have the aisle one. I could stick my leg out, my legs out the aisle. But like, I tried to like, bring my knees up under the, that's what I did on the back of the person chair. I was like, it sucks. Like, everyone's like, comfortable, and I'm like,
I love the window seats. Like everyone gets bored of it. Like they are so interesting and so Land.
It's so nice, isn't
Just-
it?
Yeah.
It feels like you completely just in a dream. It's like, oh, fuck, yeah.
Oh, what? Different part. Bigger than that.
I remember coming here, like I got the middle seat, and the girl got so bored of like third, she just closed it. Like, oh, I want to see her.
Oh, I would cry.
Yeah.
I love, so there's been a few times where I've flown to Melbourne and like the Overland. So it's like a good 11-hour train trip, but it's just so interesting. The stuff you see out the window, and like it's so comfortable as well because like you can easily fall asleep with the train on the back and forth, and noise, and everyone's really quiet. So it's like, oh, okay. I could look out the window, or I could fall asleep, or I could look out the window. Like it's hard.
I feel like train trips.
Love it. And then like when you look out the window and stuff, or like every time you get to a new town, they'll like, you know, be like, hey, this is about the town, like, or we're approaching this town, this is the time kind of deal. It's
That's so cool.
friggin' love entrance. I would, oh.
There are slow car rides, I don't know why.
Yeah.
It's like, we made this huge trip from Sydney to Melbourne for Pax. It's like, it was just 200 years ago now.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my god, it was so good. Like, just all the mountains and just like the landscape,
Yeah.
the trees, and like the random towns in the middle of nowhere. Like,
It's so cute. I love seeing like the abandoned cars or abandoned buildings. I'm like,
Yeah.
what happened there? I'm so curious.
yeah.
Because I'm used to doing like 6 hour drive to like kind of, so it's outback New South Wales. So
Oh, yeah.
Broken Hill just like
Yeah.
past the border. So it's like I'm used to doing that drive a lot. So now it's like, oh yeah, I've seen kind of all the scenery I'm into. I can just sleep the whole way. But like, it's still nice sometimes to look around and be like, oh, you know, there's cool shit happening over here or over
Yeah.
here. It's like, oh, there's something new here. Like, it's cool. I love car trips. Love them. The forum's closed. The boot camp forum's closed. So, it's closed to 9 a.m. The boot camp forum is closed up.
Really? I never knew that.
Really?
It says on the top, it's
I was
like
looking at-
Wednesday the
I don't
15th
think that
at 9
many people
a.m.
have uploaded mine. Thank you.
Look, I've uploaded week 6, week 1, and week 2. Because I'm still doing material renders, and I'm still measuring out my Ferrari, so I'm like, ugh.
From
Set up top there.
See.
I submitted it with a minute to spare.
so that means for
I think we've got, because we sent out an email, I think we've got till Friday to fix everything up and have submitted, but for some reason the forum closes today. I was really confused about that. So it's like if we want feedback, I think we have to submit it by today. And then if we want to fix things up with feedback, you know, it's, we get the break to fix shit up, I think, and then
Yeah.
as long as it's all fixed up within the final presentation at the end of the semester, we're good. That's what I got from that email.
Exactly right.
Yay! I have break to have to fix things. Okay, that makes me feel better.
Like, yeah, because this weekend is like very dramatic.
I'm so ready to just back to sleep. Characters my type.
going to get on those bigger giant halfway from.
I don't know, I'll be doing people drawing tonight.
At least it's only like the first and second station.
I'm ready to pull like a caffeine fueled rage again. I have a Red Bull in my fridge, I'm ready to go. Like, as much as I would like to do it again, I'm gonna do it again. It's really weird as well because the character design one says Wednesday, 6 p.m. But then in the actual assessment, it's 6 p.m. Friday evening. I'm like, I get it, but yeah.
So this happens like every festival in August.
just don't stress about it. I'm the one that grades everything, and I'm not stressed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you guys all freak out. Like I'm literally the person that grades every single person's work at
Go
CW.
Simon!
Yeah. So like Katie and Shane and Jason, like they all help as well, right? It's like I know your grade. I already know your grade. I already know your grade. I already know your grade. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like you can't change anything.
Yeah.
Everyone thinks they're gonna like within 3 days. I'll change my thing from a 68 to a 97. It's like
Yeah, it's
no,
not-
you won't. It's like you grade. I already know everyone's grading this room. You know what I mean? Like there's pretty
Yeah.
much nothing you can do that's gonna change it in the space of like a couple of days. So like just don't stress out. Like this at the moment, like the main thing is your presentation at the end of the semester. Really, that's all Katie, Shane, Jason and I care about. Like, we're not going to really even do much between now and then because we're all so busy. So
Oh,
the
yeah,
checkpoint is just a checkpoint. Like a lot of times we don't even grade it until basically the presentation because
Yeah.
we just don't have time to get to it. So
Yeah, that's fair enough.
yeah, it's more just like the checkpoint's really for people that are like completely falling off the wagon. So like it's like, oh, you haven't done anything for 7 weeks. Like what's going on? You know, and I pull them into the boardroom, we have a chat, and I'm like, what's going on? They're like, I've been sick for 5 weeks, or like my grandma died, or I don't want to do CDW anymore. You know what I mean? Like that's what the checkpoint's for. It's not for you guys that are like, I haven't done one more cube or whatever. It's like, I'm not worried about you guys. You're fine, yeah. And like it won't, you know, like we already know sort of what your grade is. So yeah, and it's always like changed around a bit just because we keep changing
I feel
things.
like it's
but,
just the
yeah.
way I feel like it's the way it's put forward. Everyone's like, oh my god, I need to finish like everything in a week. Like, it's just like, oh my god, it's scary. But like, yeah, I think people just get afraid of it because it's like another deadline. They're like, deadline?
Yeah.
Deadline?
Yeah. No, I understand, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's just like the checkpoints are certainly it's just whatever you got done.
Yeah.
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 And some people are like, my instructor was sick for a week, so do we have to have all 8 weeks? I'm like, no. like I know your instructor was sick for a week, so it's only like we'll only be looking at the 6 weeks of stuff.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
Like so don't.
Just the principle of like having that sense of pleasure and not just moving on that kind of like day-to-day stress. Like that's why I am a bit stressed. Like I just want to like put a cap on some things and just move on.
And it's just like, okay, next thing. Final project. Like, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's all like I totally get it. It's just yeah, like I said, the checkpoints are really designed for people that are like super struggling and just, like haven't seen work from for ages, and then I pace them up. Yeah.
Good step.
It sounds so reassuring when you say it. I don't know why. It's like I don't know. I feel like everyone just feels like pressured for some reason. It's like
When you read the form, it's like, but it was due last Friday. It's like, no. It's like the thing's going to close down. It's like, no, because I'm not going to close it down. It's like, yeah.
So I noticed that the workspace outside's opened up. Does that mean we can access
It's
it
all
still?
open. Yeah, you guys can go and have a walk and have a look around, and yeah.
So do we get like, have they renovated the whole floor?
Is the kitchen back up and running?
Yep. Yep.
No, take away! I can't do that if we're renovate here. I'm going.
Save money again. Go on, please. Give me your collective different sign. Every time you call out to you always have to.
I mean, I'm kind of slightly catching up on her. Every day I'm trying.
See, that's why I said to myself. And that's marginally better than just doing the first 20 and then typing in your head.
Hey everyone, how's it going? Let me know if this mic is on, if we're all working.
Hey Jim,
Yeah.
how's it going?
Hey. Just gonna go through and collect Ferraris, I guess. That's gonna be the plan for today.
All of the Ferraris.
All of them, yeah. Just gonna set that up. But yeah, it's I haven't gotten a chance to look through all of them, but there's some cool stuff there so far. Just gotta find a big. Here we go. Yeah, find one of these big files that we can drag everything into, and then we'll struggle with Photoshop again to be able to drag stuff in properly without it completely ruining everything. All right. Cool. Yeah, I don't know what the what's the date today? 15th. So yeah, it might not be heaps of people who've sort of handed their stuff up so far. We'll sort of check. I'm kind of imagining, people will kind of struggle a little bit at this sort of stage. This is where the rubber meets the road, literally. You sort of get to struggle with some of these concepts that we kind of been talking about, right? But we haven't actually sort of had to do something that so obviously will show where we're kind of deficient, I guess. Cool. That's Daniela. Scroll. Cool. All right, we'll check these out. So it looks like Bronte is still at sketch phase, so we can still look at those. Again, I'd say these look a little bit sort of rough for what we want. I think that the sketches are kind of okay, and they'll sort of do the job. But yeah, I'd really focus on again, just trying to sort of place all those sort of objects a little bit more accurately, right? Just because wheels can move around, right, and that can change the composition. But yeah, I mean, I would sort of say either kind of this top left one or sort of that one. That's sort of what I'd be thinking. But I'd say, I promise you, they all feel like they probably have a little bit too much perspective on them, except for sort of this one, right? This one kind of looks cool, but again, there's a lot of distortion on there. So what you probably find is that's not going to be placed like in a nice, easy position inside the grid. Cool. All right, so that one. Cool. So this one is from week 1, the blue one. Ella, just let me know exactly what we're sort of talking about. All right, so that looks like you guys are sort of chatting in Discord. That's sort of probably what I'm sort of missing. Yeah, sort of wheels not lining up in perspective. Cool. Nice. Okay, right, so that's sort of the first one. Is that right, Ella? That's sort of what you sort of handed up, and this is sort of the correction. You can sort of check both of those. I guess this looks a little bit squashed. It feels like it's sort of being sort of squashed down. So yeah, let me know which is sort of which and what the plan is. Because yeah, it's a little bit tricky for me to sort of pass exactly which one to critique and stuff. Cool.
Hey, hang on. Duncan's just saying it's what? Sorry, Duncan. It's not the blue one.
Yeah. Okay.
The blue one's from
so the blue one was the
week
original
one.
one.
Yeah.
Okay, so the blue one's from week 1. Right. Okay, cool. So she's sort of saying like those are notes from the week 1, and then sort of having another go at with this. Okay.
Yep.
Cool. Yeah. Again, I feel like some of it's sort of working out. It feels a little bit stretched to me, Ella. And again, we can sort of look at those sort of issues and the wheels and stuff. Yeah, I feel like the wheels on the blue one are a little bit sort of better. They're working with that minor axis sort of concept a bit better. So I think it's a matter of sort of what you've got there in terms of the ground plane is kind of working in an interesting way, but I feel like maybe the ground plane isn't 100% measured out. But yeah, we can sort of check it. We can sort of talk about that and check that out. All right, so these are Samantha's, and this looks like we're sort of, again, still at that sort of last phase. Again, I'd sort of say 2 or 3 are where you want to be, and but those are looking great. Again, I feel like not sure about mirroring across center here, but it all looks pretty solid though, right? Like I'm getting good sort of just initial read on things, right? Yeah, I think that's looking really cool. Nice and solid sketches. I think, again, Samantha, I think that's a really good mix of sort of accuracy and sort of just drawing, right? So I can see you are drawing them, and, you know, that we're not sort of like referencing stuff and, you know, like there's no sort of weirdness going on, but I can see you are trying to construct those. So I feel like, again, you're doing the right things there, for sure. And again, a lot of probably what will improve is if you keep doing that. I know this sounds lame because it's like, just keep doing it. I think a lot of it is just a matter of sort of clarity of your thought versus clarity of your like hand. So the better you get at this, the easier it will be for you to maybe like nail some of these lines first off. Whereas I feel like here, maybe the brush is just kind of like a little bit big, and sometimes you're just kind of like hitting this thing where you kind of hit a line a few times and it gets a little bit mushy, if that makes sense, right? As opposed to sort of constructing that clean sort of, you know, industrial design sort of style, which tends to work better for these technical subjects, right? Like cars and things. Yeah, so that's really good. And yeah. So I think the other thing we were sort of talking about, because again, and I think we sort of talked about this a while ago about like Manon was sort of gave a few people like, I think, a mix of like good feedback and like good ideas, but also there was a couple of things that was sort of a little bit sort of off in the feedback. And so I thought it would be good to talk about that, Simon, because I know I sort of promised Manon I'd talk about it at some point. And I think what her sort of feedback was sort of that if we look at the 3D reference on the reflected objects sort of doesn't have quite as much of a gradient as we've got. So if I get that up, where is that 3D reference? Let me see if I can find it. Here we go. Yeah, so I think it's like we were sort of going over it, and my initial sort of response was kind of like, that sort of looks wrong, like just stick to the 3D reference, right? The thing is though, I think Manon was right in saying that the material examples are from a slightly higher angle, right? And in that case, when we're looking at the, where are we? When we're looking at the cylinder specifically, you're not seeing much sort of gradation down the cylinder, right? We kind of see this almost like a very boring image, right? It's just kind of flat here, right? It's almost flat here as well, right? And we just got that kind of like shadow. So the cylinder is kind of like a little bit of a dud from this angle, right? Like, and me and Simon often say, like, again, remember, you're in control of things. And this is a case where if you wanted to make it more cylindrical looking, you would probably move the camera or have some other things kind of reflecting into it to kind of show its form better, right? Now, part of getting this 3D reference here is to kind of show you like what happens when you just kind of apply the 3D mathematical logic to forms. And what you kind of see is that, again, because we're trying to map consistency, the camera kind of stays in the same spot, right? The object is kind of staying roughly in the same spot. And again, we didn't actually create this sort of a TA sort of, I think what was James Ross McNabb? He was kind of TAing.
Yeah.
He was kind of he was sort of like helping out doing some things, and he actually created these. So I don't have all the specifics of exactly whether he kept the camera exactly right. I remember he had to fudge it a little bit to kind of get the things to be the right size and stuff. Excuse me. But the point here is to kind of see, if you just apply the dumb 3D logic, this is what happens. But that's not necessarily good, right? That's just what happens. And what you'll kind of find is probably he was sort of stuck between the idea of sort of saying, let's make the spheres good, right? And he probably was like sort of arranging things and maybe optimizing for a particular geoform. And you can see that when we have like a matte object, right, this is perfectly fine. This kind of works, you know, like it creates a form that looks kind of relatively solid, right? And you can see how that is kind of affected, you know, and you can see how, again, the gloss, I think, works. And if we look at the chrome balls are quite good, right? I feel like they look like chrome balls. But the chrome kind of cylinder and the chrome sort of box don't look that interesting, right? And that's kind of, again, that's not because that's me or Simon or the CDW sort of teaching program being like, this is what these should look like. It's kind of, these are just the unfortunate things that happen to a chrome sort of cylinder when you do this to them, right? It kind of doesn't really have a lot of form. So the trick here is sort of like, well, what is the exercise, right? It's not necessarily just to copy the 3D reference, right? The 3D reference will kind of like give you a good indication of like what's happening. But that's why, again, in many ways, what I'm kind of also saying is that you're kind of a little bit on your own in terms of like interpreting this exercise, right? There's no right or wrong way to do it per se. It's just that if it doesn't look like a chrome cylinder, I'm going to be like, well, that looks wrong. And that's not necessarily fair, but I think there is a point where once you move past the basic sort of concepts here, of like, here's how you render like matte objects. And again, you can understand how the chrome reflections work, right? And you can sort of study those. But the real goal here is for you to be able to sort of create material differentiation. So making sure that you can sort of say, this is metal, this is plastic, right? You know, this is skin, this is rubber, etc. And what you find is that often, again, artists in 2D are able to cheat a little bit and you know, move a little bit past the concept of sort of that 3D look. And if this was something you would do in 3D and you wanted to make something look like a cylinder, you'd probably, again, adjust stuff. You'd adjust camera angle, you'd adjust the background to kind of make it look better. But that's why, again, I've often been sort of favorable to myself sort of, you know, adding like sort of vertical, right, like vertical reflections in it, because again, that's kind of what you expect to see with chrome. So if we look at the sphere sort of reference and stuff, and the material reference, where are we? Here we go, chrome, right? The idea is sort of like, this is kind of what you're meant, this is what a cylinder is kind of meant to look like in chrome. And if you kind of give it that look, it'll kind of look like Chrome. Does that make sense? Now, the point is like, well, is that what Chrome looks like in all sort of lighting scenarios? Maybe, maybe not, right? But, you know, this sort of thing is often what we're looking for when we're sort of thinking about that highly reflective sort of metallic surface. So part of these exercises and part of you rendering your Ferrari is understanding how the science of it works, which is very much similar to how the 3D works. And part of it is understanding what does reality look like, and then how do I extract the iconic elements from a particular material from reality and then apply it to my art, right? And it's that process that we're kind of learning, right? As opposed to just sort of copy the 3D or copy this or copy that, right? Because again, you have to be able to look at material in the real world and extract the data from it to sort of understand, well, that's probably what's happening on a physics-based level with that thing. You know, but here's also just generally what people sort of expect it to look like. And you kind of have to sort of a bit combine and fuse those things. And it's how you do that that really defines your sort of style, right? You know, how you interpret those things. So, yeah, so the trick is it's sort of like, again, what Manon's saying is like using effective artistic license. So it doesn't have to be 100% accurate, but you can't do anything silly or wrong, right? And I know that sounds a little bit unfair because it's like, well, what is silly or wrong? Well, I don't know. But for instance, I think here's where the main thing that was sort of a little bit off with what sort of Manon was sort of saying. The only really thing that was sort of off was just that these objects that are reflecting things like a mirror will reflect the dark sky, and you can see that in the 3D reference. So that's the only thing that was kind of like a little bit sort of off. And again, that's just one of those things that's sort of very tricky to kind of get your head around, right? So, right, like again, you can sort of look at all the Chrome things and they all sort of reflect whatever is in the sky. In our instance, though, we don't have like a dark, we don't have, yeah, I will, for sure. Yeah, we don't have like a dark ground plane and a light sky. We actually have a light ground plane and a dark sky. So the Chrome is sort of going to reflect the dark sky. So if we sort of look at where are the material sort of examples.
Yeah, we
Right.
have spoken
Again,
about
so this would
we've
be-
spoken about that in many classes before, not to you guys specifically, but yeah, just the way the 3D set up is that it's basically like a black vacuum up above. It's like as though it's like night
Yep.
sky. So like you put a light there, but above the light, so it's like in this case, how it's been set up is like there's a point light there, but above the point light there's nothing, right? Does that make sense? So it's like a street
Yeah.
light. So there's a street light and above it is the dark sky. Yeah, so when you do like when you put something light, when you put a HDRI in the scene, which Tim just had then all of a sudden the top
Yep.
of the object is light because reflecting what's above it. So that's where it's like this was just one example of Chrome. Yeah, I mean it works in all sorts of different ways. And as soon as you have something like so when you get a Chrome vase or whatever, I'm trying to look around for one at the moment, Tim, but don't have one here. Normally do. Is like
Yeah.
it's going to get all that like striation down the front because it's just
the stretching.
it's just stretching the environment that's around it. So that's what makes all those lines, right?
Yeah, and you get weird things like we couldn't figure out, we were doing this and I'm like, I don't know why it's kind of warping it like that. Do you know what I mean? I don't know why it's kind of giving us that sort of weird thing. That seems like something that's some box I have not checked in Blender. I imagine that would kind of be sort of smooth, right, in the real sort of thing. But we did play around with this just as an example because again, this is one of those sort of things that she was like, well, you can see that in the Chrome sphere, right, there is a light above this, right? So if you look at the Chrome sort of sphere, right, you can see again there's a light there. And if you look at the reference again, so the other thing is you can see mine is kind of like, I'm going to try and make it look like Chrome, right? And I'm like, here's what the reference is going to do, here's what I'm going to do. And really what I'm trying to do from this exercise is kind of see whether I can make it look like Chrome. Does that make sense? Like that's the goal. That's my goal. Is like, can I make this thing look Chrome? Yes or no? I should be able to show it to someone and be like, what does this look like? And they'd be like, Chrome. Or if they're like, oh, it kind of looks like, I'm like, fail. if they pause and they're like, oh yeah, I don't, I'm like, you screwed up. You blew it, right? So yeah, the interesting thing here is again understanding how the reflections work on these top surfaces. So the point here is this will kind of give us good information there. But one of the things that Manon was doing, I think that was right, that again I wasn't doing, is I was kind of basing this on the 3D scene, and the 3D scene has a lot of white in the background on that ground plane. She was saying, oh, there'll actually be gradients going down because this is reflecting the scene, and this scene has more of a dark gradient sort of going up here. And I'm like, well, firstly, I think that's probably true, and I think that would look better if we do have a slightly darker sort of gradient there. But also, on the front, we don't know what's in front of this cylinder, right? We don't know because we can't see because it's sort of behind us, the viewer. So you kind of got to use, again, creative license to a degree. And again, in some cases, right, I've sort of, rendered it much more, right, as if it's sort of a cylindrical object, right? But if we look at the material examples, and I am going somewhere with this, so don't worry, I'll go back to the 3D, right? You can see, again, this is reflecting the dark sky, right? But this kind of has this big sort of light box on top of it. And again, the question is like, well, that would reflect on the cylinder, right? So there should be something up there on the cylinder. And the interesting thing about that is just looking at sort of how sort of reflections work, and that it's like that's kind of not really how reflections work. So I think I have a couple of sort of other bits in the scene that I'll see if I can sort of turn on. I'm like, yeah. So again, you can kind of see like different, a few sort of different ways that we can kind of play around with this. And again, this stuff is like sort of, to me, sort of interesting, right? So if we turn on a sphere, where's that sphere? That sphere should be, oh yeah, there we go. Got a chrome sphere. So if you sort of have these two geoforms together, right? The interesting thing, move that a little bit further away, right? So it's sort of not quite reflecting as much. So yeah, the interesting thing is that sort of we've got this kind of object above. I'll just zoom out. I'll zoom out and let it sort of let it go for a bit, so we can kind of see what's happening. I wonder whether it would work in Eevee. No, Eevee is. So you can see they're kind of like different in the way they sort of like Eevee and Cycles treat this. I think Cycles is probably more reliable. So you can see here, right? You can see in the chrome sphere, right? It's reflecting that thing above, right? And if we're sort of maybe like very high above the cylinder, right? It is going to be sort of reflecting again that sort of plane that we've got there. And you can see, right, that, that's sort of what it's affecting, right? Because again, if I sort of change the color, right, you can see it's sort of, if I make that sort of plane above red, you can see sort of what it's reflecting, all right? So this is always basically going to reflect that, right? But if I sort of look at it like this, what you kind of start to see is that I can still see the reflection of that thing in the ball, but I can no longer see it in the cylinder top. Does that make sense? Because that's not how like mirrors work. So the best sort of way you can sort of test this sort of thing is to kind of basically get your phone, like everyone's got a shiny phone. Do you know what I mean? And if you put your shiny phone down on the table, right, what you'll notice is like the reflection you see in that phone is not just what is directly above the phone. Does that make sense? So the mirror is not always just reflecting what is directly above it. It's the reflection is relative to where your eye is in relation to the mirror, right? So it's kind of almost like it's sort of, if we were to view it from the side, right, what's kind of happening is like if we're up here, right, say your head is like up here magically, and your line of sight comes down and goes bonk, right, and sort of bounces off. I imagine it kind of bounces off at like a similar angle, right, similar to kind of light. And so you might see the reflection of that again if we're sort of higher up. But if we're kind of like, you know, lower down, what kind of happens is we sort of go bounce off here, and we're actually reflecting stuff that's over here in the distance. Does that make sense? And so that's why, again, there'll be a point, right, at which, again, I'm seeing down, and now I'm seeing that reflection, right? But as I move it down, right, I see less. I'll zoom in a little bit so it's a little bit easier to see, because I'm sure that doesn't work great in badly compressed Collaborate land, right? So you can see, again, I'm sort of high up, and I'm sort of starting to see this edge. Right, but what I'm actually seeing is this edge. I'm not seeing this edge reflected here. I'm seeing the far edge, right? And as I sort of move my eye level down, right, you can see there I'm not able to see it anymore, but I can still see it in the sphere. And so that's, again, just one of those things that's like worth sort of keeping in mind if you are thinking about sort of reflections. And that's why the sphere in the material reference set, right, has this kind of big thing in it, right? It's got this sort of big, it's got a light, and it's got this kind of reflection, because that's kind of what we wanted to help us sort of, you know, understand how how that sort of reflection will get distorted, right? So that's the main point of this exercise, right? Is to be like, look how that gets distorted. That's super interesting. And again, the cube is kind of like, well, the interesting thing about this is kind of just that, yeah, like when there's nothing really in front of it, it is just almost 100% flat. And also, again, you can sort of see here how that reflection works when we've got a perfect 3D mirror, right? It's almost like just seamlessly transitions in there, right? And again, it's just reflecting what's above. And so there you can see, again, like the interesting sort of, you know, way that this sort of functions. But it's not the most interesting thing to render or copy, right? The most interesting thing is to kind of look at it and understand what's happening, right? Again, the same thing here. We're getting the reflection of the shadow, reflection of the sky, and reflection of just the endless, monotonous white sort of plane there. So the only sort of real thing that I feel like is sort of missing here, Samantha, and again, this is not necessarily, I sort of keep going on about this, but yeah, I think this was just the only thing that Manon was kind of like, oh, like maybe it would be like this instead, because she was sort of reinterpreting that 3D reference, is I think we would still have the reflection of that dark top, right? But I think the reflection here, the gradient here, I think is kind of okay. Again, there's not really going to be a sort of a highlight there as such, but I don't care about that as much, because again, that's that sort of thing where like, it'll help you to make the cylinder spherical, and that's kind of okay. Does that make sense? So it's sort of tricky. So the point at which I'm like, that's sort of, we're going against the laws of physics, is where, again, we sort of make this sort of light versus sort of dark. And I think that's the only thing that she was kind of like not 100% sort of sure on, right? But I think the rest of it is kind of fine. Yeah, so anyway, I just wanted to sort of clarify that, yeah, that's probably my bad for not being sort of explicit enough about the nature of that exercise, because again, we've done this one quite a few times, and it's sort of, it can slip through the cracks to kind of talk about exactly like how much you're meant to copy the 3D reference, how much you're meant to use your own intuition, right? Like what are we sort of expecting? But yeah, but the main thing to keep in mind is like what me and Simon want you to look at with that 3D reference is like, you know, can you extract from a photographic reference or, you know, another kind of reference material and sort of understand how you would recreate a material that looks like that. Doesn't always have to be exactly 100% right, but you need to be able to differentiate it and trigger in someone's mind, right? You know, like, oh, it looks like this material versus that material. And that's really all we're after with those material spheres, I'm sort of showing you how I would do it. And, you know, I'm not the most photorealistic sort of renderer. And again, and I feel like some of the TAs are going to be sort of like better at this sort of highly technical rendering than others. If you sort of look at their personal work, you kind of see that sort of stuff. So yeah, apologies for not being super clear with that and sort of getting to that sort of quicker. I know that's something, again, Manon was sort of super bummed about because she was like, oh, I thought I thought that was like going to be, you know, like a good sort of innovation there. But yeah, so again, we do want reflection of the dark sky in those chrome sort of surfaces where it's just a flat one. But again, you get this weird thing happening. We've got exactly the same lighting scenario, but yeah, in the round objects, you do see that. So that's really interesting, and you should sort of apply that. But again, keep in mind, the goal of the exercise is for you to learn how to basically make anything look like a particular material, right? And you can use some creativity, right? As long as you don't contravene one of the basic sort of rules, right? And again, like I would say, sort of adding vertical highlights is not really contravening one of the basic rules, because again, it increases the iconography of the material, and again, increasing the gradient from top to bottom on the cylinder. Not necessarily the worst thing either, because that does match the background. So yeah, again, it's just a matter of sort of learning these kind of, you know, things as we go, and understanding, again, the goal here is for you guys to be able to apply this sort of chrome and metal stuff to the car, right? That's the ultimate sort of goal there. Anyway, what were we talking about? We're talking about Ferraris. Let me get, there we go. I got my thing back. Cool. So I've dragged those in, Samantha, and we'll check out what some other people have got. So this is Caitlin, and cool. Nice. All right. So I'll drag that up. I think that's sort of looking pretty good. You know, all those things look like they're kind of lining up, and that looks pretty sort of accurate. Again, I'll check that out if we can sort of zoom up on it a little bit better. I think Seska, this one looks pretty good. I think that's sort of what you're meant to do. These far wheels seem a little bit wider than the near wheels. That's the first sort of thing I kind of notice. And the wheels feel a little bit wider versus versus kind of you know, sort of, again, larger diameter. But again, we'll sort of check that out and sort of do some drawovers there. But that's the main thing I kind of, you know, see happening. Yeah, but yeah, I'll check it out. Again, we do perspective archaeology for the next few weeks. Cool. So this is Samuel doing these ones. Yeah, I feel like sort of a bit more sort of 3/4 will kind of help you. Again, we're not seeing a lot of that sort of the sort of front or sort of side of it, but I think you know, so as you say, they're like maybe a little bit sort of a little bit too like viewing it from above, but I still think that would work. You know what I mean? I think that works kind of fine. Again, something like sort of 5 or 6 would probably work all right. Yeah, cool. And cool. Ella, how you going with this one? Cool. I think that's looking interesting. I think that's looking, again, I'll check it out when we get to it. Yeah, so having trouble with like all the different sort of bits and pieces and things. Yeah, I'll check out exactly sort of what is there in a bit more detail. I feel like the wheels might still be a little bit sort of wobbly, but again, I'll check out all of those things as we sort of go and give you you know, a few bits of advice. I think the drawing overall is kind of looking pretty good. But I think that the main thing we'll sort of do is just, again, check some of those sort of proportions. It feels like for some of these things, kind of you're just sort of drawing a little bit, right? Sort of just going in there and sort of having a go at sort of putting in some of those things a bit more sort of freehand. And I think it would be good to put in some of that secondary detail with a bit more sort of structure. Although I know, again, that's not any sort of specific advice. So we'll sort of go over that with draw over stuff. Cool. So how's this going? Kelly's sort of at this phase. Cool. Cool. All right. So again, just making sure I'm not like getting stuff totally wrong. Cool. So I think some of this stuff is looking cool. Again, I'm not sure whether these things are from sort of the first or like the second assignment, because again, it sort of looks similar to sort of the simple car. This one's looking pretty stretched. I feel like this one's looking a lot better. Again, I feel like the wheels are still a little bit sort of off, right? I feel like maybe they're it's just the angle of those ellipses that sort of needs work. And again, we'll sort of check out some of that stuff, this sort of draw over. Here, again, I feel like this is getting a little bit sort of wobbly, like maybe you're kind of trying to sort of redraw these things and again, sort of remask them, which again, like we don't really need to do. You can use sort of the templates that are there. So I feel like, again, the main thing here is probably to sort of understand what's happening with the matte objects a little bit better. But we can sort of go over some of those things. But yeah, I'd say, Kelly, just make sure you're sort of using the templates and those sort of Photoshop elements. It feels like, again, some of this stuff is getting a bit brushy. And again, it's just all about getting those sort of basics down, right? Where I still feel like some of those sort of basic things are not quite there. So if you're at that stage where, again, everyone else is sort of a little bit further ahead, because you said you kind of like, you've fallen a little bit sort of behind, which again is totally fine. It's not going to make a huge difference in the long run. But I would sort of just let's really make sure we can just sort of get the sphere and the cube right with the basic sort of rendering, because I feel like some of those things are still just not quite there, right? The basic sort of cube and sort of sphere. And there's a few of these areas where it feels like we're sort of painting that sort of stuff in, whereas we should be using selections and stuff like that. Yeah, but no, I think some of it's looking cool. I appreciate you going through and doing all that stuff, but I'd go a little bit slower and really sort of check out some of those basic sort of concepts and get that working with a few of those major geoforms, as opposed to kind of replicating it, because I feel like we're sort of replicating some of the same sort of errors there. Cool. All right. So we've got some notes. This is sort of what we had before. Awesome. So yeah, looks like you guys are getting some pretty good notes from TAs, TAs probably going to get much better at drawing Ferraris than they were when they were in second year. Because yeah, most of those guys kind of did okay at best. I remember. Now I'm looking, I'm like, hey, that looks heaps better than your previous one, Duncan. Which again just goes to show you, right? Like, it might be cool to sort of show some people the TA's kind of Ferraris, and we can see how much everyone has improved, right? Yeah, because it is this sort of thing that just takes iteration. Cool. But this is Daniela's, and
yeah, it does.
Nice.
It does just take. It takes a bit of time, and it's also like, I think there's something that happens in our brain when you're like, okay, now I've got to draw the Ferrari, and you just forget all the stuff that we've been doing. Like, I don't know how many times I've been yelling at people about ellipses not yelling, you know what I mean, talking about ellipses, and then you see people do ellipses, you're like, what are you doing? Like, remember, it's like really, really easy. I'm not saying this about yours, Danielle, but just in general, right? So yeah, I think with this stuff, just keep going through and just simplify it as much as possible. You see what Duncan's doing. And it's what Tim and I would do as well. He's just like simplifying it. Is just looking at your thing, going back. What are the steps? What did I do wrong? Just like simplify it, and then kind of go from there. And that's the main thing that you can do, and that's what you do when you're working, like when you're doing stuff for realsies, right? Is like when you're doing stuff, you're like, you just wing it, and most of the time it's like looking good, and then you'll do something, it's like, oh my god, this looks horrendously bad. What's going on? And then you go back and you're like, hang on a minute, is like my perspective out? And you're like, check that. Okay, that's all good. And then you check, all the different things, and you have this sort of like checklist. So that's sort of what you want to do with your Ferrari sketches. Just like go through the checklist. Because remember when you set it up, it's just a series of like boxes, and just be like, are my boxes right? Step 1, are my boxes right?
Yeah.
Step 2, like you're doing your wheels, right? And it's like, are my wheels right? All right, is the width right? Is the height right? What's going on? And like Daniela, you're like, I had a problem, and I saw in your thing straight away. I'm like, yeah, it's just because you didn't put the body of the car off the ground. Like, so then your wheels look too small. So you're like, you knew the wheels looked wrong, but you like couldn't kind of work out by yourself like why they looked wrong. Does that make sense? So just go through the checklist of like, why is this not working? And just sit there and be like, okay, it's good. There's got to be something I did wrong, and just go through and be like, and then you'll see, oh shit, I didn't just lift that up a little bit off the ground. Yeah. And then away you go.
Yeah. So pay attention to this stuff that I sort of made some notes last week, Simon, that just sort of go through the things that you sort of need to pay attention to what you're doing. So again, I'll sort of use that as an example for, again, things that, when I'm sort of referencing, like maybe this thing isn't happening, I'll sort of reference that sort of image because, again, like this is an example of like probably the steps that you need to sort of take, the things that are likely to sort of be wrong. And this is actually quite challenging because we're doing one thing that's very tricky. And I think we can sort of see where that sort of happens is like, you can kind of draw these boxes, but then you don't really know whether it looks like a Ferrari until you kind of put all the stuff on it. So you're kind of thinking proportion, but you don't really know when you're doing proportion whether it's going to look right. And that's that sort of muscle you need to build where you're sitting there drawing boxes, but you're kind of able to understand sort of how this box is going to relate to something. Right. And I think that's just experience, right? Knowing like, if I draw a box this big and I sort of chop a bunch of stuff off it, then it'll probably look like this. Right. But you kind of got to know that, right? Like when you're kind of roughing that thing in. So I think probably one of the things I'm sort of seeing with this sort of construction that, again, we'll go over, Daniela, is just we're not kind of finding center, right? So I'm not sort of seeing the center sort of there, right? Again, sort of, this was something, again, that was sort of happening here, right? Just how big are those sort of cubes and boxes, right? It's really important, again, to sort of find that sort of center line. I just feel like that's kind of, I'm not seeing it on that sort of construction there, and that's sort of really important. But yeah, I mean, it's looking like it's getting there, right? But we just probably need to just chew up a few of those things first. All right, so we had a few more. Just gonna check. Yeah. All right, and I'm assuming these ones are kind of ones that have had sort of TA feedback on them. So we'll check sort of what's been happening here. Yeah, and I'll close all these ones. Others will have just too many. Cool, all right. Yeah, so we'll just sort of get these sort of ready, and then we'll keep doing the same thing for these sort of next set of people. And then we'll probably have a break. Cool. So this is Michael's Nice. So again, some good sort of feedback there.
Michael was just gone and drawn a Ferrari. He needs to calm down.
Yeah, he's just. I think there's a few people who just kind of went way sort of further. I feel like maybe that's just your attitude to life, Michael. It's just like I'm gonna get there in the end. And I think all I was saying last week was just like, slow down, because if you move too fast, you're just going to end up having to redo a bunch of stuff. So here again, I think again, like sort of Joe was sort of giving you a few sort of pointers on how to sort of construct that stuff out. Because I think one of the main things that was sort of happening there was sort of again, this sort of looked okay, but then this kind of isn't actually fitting this grid, and I'm not exactly sure how that's sort of working. Cool. Yeah, so again, I feel like this one is sort of working a little bit better. It's a little bit sort of tricky to see sort of what's going on, but I think that is sort of looking pretty good. So I'll drag that up. And again, that's kind of what we had. That's kind of what you sort of ended up sort of drawing, I think. So we'll get both of those. And cool. Nice. So these are Ella's. It's that homework. That's looking pretty cool. Yeah, I think that's looking pretty solid. Lots of really good stuff happening there. Yeah, we'll check that out. Might be, again, I feel like some of these things are kind of maybe drawn in a little bit early, right? Some of these sort of details, right? I feel like some of it's kind of working pretty well, but I feel like we might need a little bit more structure, right, to figure out how to add some of these sort of elements. But I think overall, like the overall sort of proportion and stuff like that's looking quite good. The wheels look pretty good. Again, just where, like how they kind of connect up, I think is something that we could sort of look at in general. But again, it's probably...
We're really sorry, guys, but in this assignment, there is no winging it to be had. You'll be measuring every goddamn thing in this car, right? So, like, when you guys just draw this stuff, it's like, just... No, don't do that. Like the pipes at the back and stuff. No. All right, hell, it's all good. It's good you're giving go, but like Tim said, right? You just, it's just a waste of time because you will just have to redraw it, you know. So like, just don't wing stuff. All right, everything. You should just be able to measure everything. You should be able to construct every single part. You know, if there's any bit where you're sitting there and you're like, maybe I'll just like draw this bit and it'll be okay. This is like, slap me on the hand. No. It's cool, guys. Like some of you jumped ahead
last week.
Yeah, some of you guys like jumped ahead and like it's fine. It's totally fine. Just be in your head like, okay, if I'm winging stuff, like I'm sort of doing it a bit wrong. So what do I need to, like I was saying to Danielle before, just simplify it, you know, bring it back, be like, how do I actually measure all this stuff? You know, how do I get it so it's all lining up? And normally when you do that, if it's like the front little vents on the car, you're like, oh, hang on a minute. I need to actually measure like how they sit across the car. And then like I need to measure them and mirror them out so they're sitting in the same spot across the car. All right?
Yeah.
So you see
so
Tim says like,
where...
there's no winging it anywhere. There's like a couple little bits where you just, there's a couple of bits where you get, where your brain just goes like, I can't do this anymore. But
the thing is that I think that probably it's once you get to rendering it that you realize the value in doing that stuff, right? So like rendering all of this stuff at the back was like very easy, and I didn't spend a lot of time doing it. And, you know, if I make little mistakes, it's probably not going to matter so much because the drawing is there, right? And that's where, again, you know, so like trying to figure out, again, you know, how to sort of space and construct those kind of, you know, cylinders, right? You know, you can see in the demo that I sort of, you know, I've tried doing that a few times, but yeah, you know, we need all these ellipses to match up, right? And I think I did like duplicate them, right? So it's like, you know, look, you know, you can cheat here and there. You can sort of just go ahead, but there was many times where I tried to wing it, right? I think like in the demo, I try wing during this break thing and it just doesn't work. You know what I mean? I'm like, you know what? I had to go back and redo that properly with some, you know, proper sort of ellipse templates and stuff. There's probably some things like these little pipes where I'm like, I can kind of fit that in, right? But, you know, that, yeah, all of this stuff, you can see that stuff's pretty well, it's not perfectly constructed, but again, my version of winging it, right, is like significantly, right, more technical than most people's, right? So that's all I'd say. I'm like, yeah, you can wing some stuff, but like not as much as you think. Does that make sense? Like you really need to kind of, again, figure out like where do these, where do these little mirrors like connect to the body? Exactly, where is that? We've got like some of these little, you got to figure out, like, let's draw these out. They're in the reference. We can see what they are. I think the most frustrating thing was trying to figure out how to draw this fucking spring, right? Because I think I did that like 5-6 times. I was like, surely I'll be able to wing it, right? You just do one thing there, one thing there. Every time I did it, it was like a mess. And then I was like, oh, okay, well, and then I was kind of like, well, does it matter if it really is a spring? Maybe it could just be a soup. Yeah, again, that stuff can be sort of like, a bit annoying, right? The degree of sort of detail, right? But trying to figure out, again, like what's underneath here, because you can see something there. We get to have a look at that once we see that sort of model reference, right? Or people making the little models. But yeah, you can see I'm trying to, again, trace the contour, right? So I have multiple sort of contours of the sort of body of the car, and that's what allows me, again, to place those vents side by side, get those curves around there. I feel like the front, like this is too square, you know what I mean? That's sort of a mistake I made. So there's things that are wrong with mine, right? But yeah, in terms of like, there being things that are cylindrical, look cylindrical, things that kind of mirrored from one place to another, right? A really tricky thing with the pipes is this is similar to the trees, right? You've got to make sure they look cylindrical at all times, right? You've got to make sure it doesn't sort of get like spaghetti, because otherwise if you try and render it, it won't work. It won't look very good. And again, I'm not saying mine's like 100%, fully technical, but that's something I was really thinking about. You won't be sort of stuck there trying to render it and being like, what's going on? There's a couple of things I sort of wing. I feel like I probably didn't like fully construct the shape of the side mirrors. You know what I mean? There's like probably a little bit of like, no one will notice, right? But you have to figure all that stuff out, because otherwise you go to render it and you'll be like, what's there? You won't be able to add highlights to things. You won't be able to figure out like where does the highlight go? Where are the rivets? Like you won't be able to put like highlights on these like different little bits and pieces, like that stuff will be sort of tricky. And it kind of will be very difficult to get to that higher next level of polish. And the thing here, the overall sort of, lesson of this is that typically when people are trying to get a high level of polish in their work in general, right? And I feel like, I don't know, I mean, you guys tell me, but, is that something that you're kind of struggling with, right? Like getting more polish? Because, that's something I feel like, often is sort of, people want that from a career perspective, right? But if that's something you're sitting there wanting, right? But let me know, like, if that's the case. If you're sitting there wanting like more polish, the only way to really get more polish and finish detail is to work your secondary forms better. Because it's developing those secondary forms. And what do I mean by secondary form? I mean all of that stuff, right? Being like, oh, there's a bunch of little cylinders here. Well, let's draw them out. Like, oh, we've got some sort of, this ridiculous, silly set of pipes at the back, right? And I literally picked this car because I was like, yeah, that's going to be hard to draw, right? We could have picked a whole bunch of like cars from that era. The reason I picked this one is like, you look at it and you're like, oh, I don't want to draw that. That's a nightmare. That's simple. Like, that's why we pick it, right? Because it kind of forces you to do those things. But it is it's those little secondary form details, right? Where you're kind of really actually figuring out, like, like how far out does this headrest, sit from the rest of the body, right? What are all these other little details, right? Let's get the ellipses of these sort of things, right? If you don't actually draw that in, or you don't actually work on that stuff, you'll never be able to just kind of add more highlights and shininess, right? You need to know where all those little details go. And I know that seems like, oh, that's like a big sort of thing. But I think the problem is when you're first doing it the first time, it feels like this big leap you have to make to kind of sit there and like, oh man, really? I gotta do all those like throttle bodies, and then like I gotta sort of draw a wire to each one. I'm like, yeah, you do. And the first time you do that, it seems like such a big effort. Once you just get more used to doing this stuff, right? It doesn't sort of tax your brain as much. You just kind of do it because you know, like, oh yeah, that's going to be like a lot of drawing ellipses, right? But you can kind of just, you know, do it. You just chill out, you do it. You just know the level of detail you kind of need to support the rendering later on. And you just kind of do it. You know, and I feel like that's like a really, really key thing to pay attention to. And yeah, it's very easy for people to go like a long time in their career and not really ever get that stuff sorted properly. You know, and they just never really have the level of detail they need, right? And they're never really working on that, you know, secondary form. And yeah, you just kind of always get to the end and you're like, oh, I just need more highlights and shininess, and, you know, I'll just add more little dots of detail, and it just doesn't work, right? You never get to that high level of polish that I think a lot of people are wanting. So this is sort of designed to help us with that, right? Or to make your life hard, basically. It means you kind of can't do it if we don't work the secondary form. Cool. So anyway, here's alias. I will get another sort of Ferrari here, and I'll drag as many of these as I can in, and we'll sort of talk about them. But again, I feel like TAs are kind of on it for sort of helping you guys if you're sort of, you know, really sort of struggling with this. So I might just sort of give, again, like a few notes and things that you can sort of use. And we'll do some drawers of a few of those things. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that car just sort of looks cool, right? Just got so much stuff on it. Good practice for drawing mechs and all those kind of things that often, you know, I think just because people like it, have exposed technology and stuff. Cool. I think this one's looking good, Jasmine. Again, I'd sort of say, again, nice sort of 3/4 view is going to be sort of the best. I think that's sort of working nicely. Yeah, cool. Cool, awesome. Nice work, George. I think that's looking pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, it looks good. I'm not seeing center, but I feel like, again, it must be in there somewhere. Again, I feel like the wheels might be a little bit small. The boxes for the wheels might be a little bit sort of small compared to these things, right? Compared to sort of what we've got here. But see how you go. A lot of that is just going to come down to how big you put the body in there. Cool. Nice. I think that's actually looking pretty good, Aaron. Yeah, cool. Again, I'm not seeing heaps of that sort of structure. That feels really solid to me, like that's sort of working nicely. I'm not seeing a lot of the sort of center line sort of work there, or exactly where the ground plane is, and I feel like that stuff will kind of help. But yeah, I think like what you've got there is looking pretty cool. Cool. All right, so that's sort of what we've got. Cool, got that one there. Nice. Yeah, I mean, I can see there's a lot of work is sort of going on there. I feel like the overall sort of proportion is looking good. Some of the, like, but again, it feels a little bit wide, right? So again, we can sort of check some of those things, but it feels like just the angle of some of those wheels is a little bit sort of fussy. And again, the body of the car seems quite sort of chunky, right? So yeah, I think the general thing there, Marissa, is that it feels like it's kind of, like if you look at kind of how sort of narrow this car is versus your car is sort of like a lot wider, right, than we're sort of seeing. And so normally what's sort of happening there is just, it's that initial sort of box, right, that's sort of not quite matching up, right? So that's sort of what I'd sort of work on, right, is just getting that sort of, again, width, right, versus length correct. I think I dragged that in. Yeah, cool. Cool. These are Megan's. Nice. I think some of that's looking cool. Got some good sort of rendering there. Again, could use a little bit more ambient occlusion on those sort of like white matte objects. I think it's sort of working here. Some of that's sort of looking good. Although, again, remember, right, we do have a little sort of reflection there that you kind of see as well of the shadow. Again, I feel like some of these are kind of looking, again, I feel like we're getting the material definition there sort of starting to happen. Again, I feel like we could just push like core shadow, right, a little bit more on some of these. And again, just with the rubber, just pull the highlight a little bit out a little bit more. I think that'll kind of give it that slight, it needs to be a little bit shinier in some places. Oh, looks like we did 2 of those. Cool. So yeah, let us know when you get Ferraris, or is that sort of earlier stuff? Cool. Yeah, that looks like that's simple Ferrari, right? Cool. Okay. Because yeah, sometimes people are still catching up on work, and then I just scroll to the bottom and I'm like, oh, this is work you've sort of redone from week 2, so obviously you haven't done any other stuff. And then I sort of scroll up and I'm like, oh, actually you've done all of it. So let me know if I'm missing you right there. Cool. This is Andy's. Again, same thing. Are we all right? Yeah, cool. I think some of these are looking good. Again, just check the shape of some of those highlights, right? Some of that stuff could be a little bit, again, this one's going to be stretched. This one is normally, again, a little bit more circular, again, like that. But I think you've got the general idea. I think that some of the metal ones are looking good. Again, this, I don't know whether that's meant to be just matte gray or not. Again, let me know. I think if it's meant to be rubber, I think we need a bit more sort of highlight there. But yeah, cool stuff. And again, this is where, like, if people are really behind, we talk about this a fair bit, sort of, Simon. If you're behind, don't, like, what we want you to do is focus on learning the core concepts as much as possible. So please do not, if you're behind, sort of jump into the Ferrari and kind of just like try and wing the back exhaust manifold and all that kind of stuff. Like just do basically a simple Ferrari, right? And try and get it as accurate in proportion as possible. Because what you'll find is, like, the proportion is the thing that most people are going to get wrong. Their Ferraris are going to be detailed and they'll still look good. But, even the best Ferraris are just going to be a little bit too big. The wheels are going to be a little bit wrong or whatever, and that's fine. But if you're just winging it, then don't worry, right? Like, make sure whatever you're doing, you're measuring it and trying to get the proportion as accurate as possible. If that means you have to do a simplified sort of version of things where, and we've sort of said this in the past, basically, me and Simon have kind of said, try and get the simple Ferrari working, but then we'll just render it up, right? So, that can be a great sort of thing to do, is like, don't try and just sort of put in a bunch of stuff, right? If you're behind, sort of, Andy, because again, I'm just saying that because it feels like, again, some of these things are a little bit sort of behind. Again, you can almost do the Ferrari exercise without putting the secondary form in. Just don't wing it, right? That's the trick, right, Simon? Like, it's sort of stop winging stuff. It's okay if it's simpler, right? It's okay if someone, like, sort of doesn't put in the exhaust manifold. Does that make sense? Like, just don't wing it. Like, spend your time learning how to put in the stuff that you can, right? Spend as much time as you can, getting as much detail as you can, but don't wing anything, right? Because it always just ruins the whole thing, if that makes sense. So
Yeah, I
again,
agree with that.
it's all about you're learning it. You have to learn how to not just sort of try and squiggle in a bunch of lines and hope just cross your fingers. Because again, it's like it might sort of look more interesting, but again, that's not what we're trying to sort of learn here. Yeah, cool. So just keep that in mind if you're behind. We sort of showed people how to do a simple version of the Ferrari, and I think the best thing to do again if you're like way behind is think about the core concepts that we're trying to learn here, which is how to draw ellipses, how to draw curved forms, right? So the ellipses are the wheels, the curved form is the body of the car, right? So how do you, like the boat, how do you create a sort of an organic hard surface form, right? Something that's not just a square. How do we create like a curved form in perspective? And then we've got the mirroring and the measuring, right? And so that just means, can we get, again, width versus length right? And can we make sure that things are symmetrical over a center line? So you got ellipses, curved forms, mirroring, and measuring, right? So they're four core concepts. Ellipses, you need to know how to draw ellipses. You need to know how to draw curved forms in perspective, like a boat hull or the sort of main body of a Ferrari. You need to know how to mirror things, right? So the wheels look like they are correctly mirrored across the center line. And you need to know how to measure general proportions so that the width versus the length versus the height of your Ferrari is accurate to the reference. And then we need to know how to do material differentiation. And the core things there are we have metal in the Ferrari, we have rubber in the Ferrari, and we have the sort of red paint in the Ferrari. And so we need to differentiate those three base materials. Those are the core concepts of this exercise, and I want everyone to focus on getting those right. Again, remember, it's not about the Ferrari, it's just a tool and a method and a subject we're using to learn those core concepts, right? So if you're sort of lost and you're like, oh, I might not be able to make it there in time, as long as you are learning those core concepts, you'll be better off in the long run, right? That means when we go to do this again next semester, right, and we do our P38 Lightning plane, right, which is, again, if people are, not 100% sure what that one is, see if I can sort of find that. That means when we come to do, again, the next sort of iteration of this, you'll have the core concepts down, right? So again, the other thing we sort of done is you can't escape this. You can't wing your Ferrari, right? We're going to do it again. We're going to do the same sort of thing, right? And again, those core concepts, if you really nail them down, will serve you really well next semester, right? Because we're going to do the same thing. Just again, with a slightly different subject that challenges us in a slightly different way. So yeah, you have an opportunity to perfect some of these things as we progress, but you certainly can't just kind of, again, like try to squiggle in the exhaust manifold and then be like, phew, I escaped, That works in high school, it doesn't work here. We've designed it specifically so you can't do that, right? Like a huge part of the curriculum is designed so that you can't squeeze through. Right? A lot of school subjects are actually designed so you can squeeze through, right? This is designed so that's really hard, right? So that we keep testing the same things and we can kind of see, right, whether you get it or not, right? And all our job is to tell you, like, you're not understanding this, and that will make your life as a professional career artist really hard, right? I guess that's our sort of job, right? Is to give you as many opportunities to teach that, to learn that, where we can give you feedback and stuff. Yeah, but again, it's not sort of designed to be like, here's a simple exercise and you can kind of wing it and it'll be okay. And then, on your way you go. And then again, when you get first job, 3 a.m. in the morning and you realize, shit, I can't draw. I'm screwed. Yeah. Anyway, we should probably, I know I keep ranting on about this stuff. That's been my rant for the day about basic perspective. Simon's is probably coming up soon. Yeah, cool. Okay, so that's Duncan. Duncan has sort of given you some feedback, Marianne. And I think we might be hitting some more of that sort of stuff. So this is sort of Nancy. And again, you had like a few, let me drag that up. Yeah, cool. Cool. Ashley, nice. So you've got that happening there. Cool. I think that's looking pretty good. Again, I'd like to see center a bit more there. I feel like some of that, like the width, I'm not 100% sure about. Again, it's sort of roughly looking okay. But yeah, we'll check that out. Do some drawovers, and I'll just refresh that because there's a few people who are handing stuff up late. Cool. So this is Joe giving you some sort of feedback. Lewis, and we haven't magically seen some. So again, that's those. If you haven't seen me sort of go over your sort of stuff, so I'm basically up to where are we up to? Lewis. So down here. So everyone's sort of below Lewis, right? I'm assuming that sort of you've been given feedback, but you haven't sort of handed up anything new. There might be some sort of new people here, but yeah, I don't think so. All right, I think that's basically where we're at. So that's all of that sort of critiquing stuff there for the moment. Let's take a break now, Simon, and I will we'll come back at sort of 10:30, and I'll try to put all those sort of images into a big PSD document, and then we'll sort of go over some notes, talk about those sort of issues again. We'll tell you again why it's important to learn perspective and and rendering and stuff like that. Cool. So we'll catch you then.
Sounds good.
So, there you go, now we'll install it, now we'll install, and do the rest. It's only 3 more, don't be a baby. Yes, you're doing it right. It's right, trust me. Yes. I just open and close the program, just sure. Give it time to cook and simmer in the oven. Okay, and then go to that little button there. Jai, and then there they are. Oh. And I'll show you the shortcuts, and that's how you do it. Oh yeah, no problem. Oh, you're not Oh no, you're doing the creative writing. Oh, right. I'm jealous. What have you been doing creative writing? Creative writing?
We only have one creative piece in the whole semester.
Damn. I'm excited for. I'm excited for.
Yes.
And that's gonna be just like, there's not gonna be actual work. Oh, like, I watched the lecture for launching that. So, for this semester, it's so good. It's I don't have energy. It can be something, but most people, I don't feel like energy and then there is and then I think once that's the best and then you smell it.
Say more and I'll be listening to
I'm just gonna go up to 15. I'm feeling so good. I'm on my, well, I can't do anything.
My goal is always to get at least 8 things done before like 4 o'clock and I just leave it for
And one of the ideas is to take projects that you potentially carry on. So that's why I was talking about it earlier as well, because it's.
What do you say about your brother?
Because
I just said that I had to
either making for one
go back and like finish and stuff,
and then you can check
like check the
but
questions,
mostly
especially the
what they're working on for this.
that was it. My art was like another
I knew my wheels would choose from, but when I was looking at the image that they had, because I drew a square over both the wheels and I drew like lines and like gone past each other. I was like, the front wheels, like, they take up like a third of the box, and then I made it a little bit of it small. I don't know. I'll just like, I might just make the back wheels the actual size of the box because I made them a bit smaller. I'll just make them the size of the box and I'll just make the front ones like half of that. So like, but then he was saying like, you know, depending on how I draw the body of the car, it could differ. So I might just draw the body first and see how it looks compared to the size of the box. The size of the wheels of the box is the exact same. So, and that's going to draw a line.
I think the plane kind of like see it here the brief.
Yeah, because then we'll have to also draw a shadow at the bottom, like a perfect map. I'll roll in there like
I swear to God, I read like one was like 8 hours.
I remember doing that.
And
when
I
we,
literally just sat there
do
not
that
with my
when we're doing the car boat thing,
Oh yeah.
the normal boat. there was like a play one that's like drove down and like did it posted.
oh, I'll only read a few chapters. I read through the
I'm not
whole story.
like I
cried.
Oh yeah, they just guessed for
Like I get through like some of them are like updated, so like and
I'll even have if I just get the main body down and the shoes at the back. I get them all
20 and then
clear.
they're done for the day.
I read up to 80 and I'm just
You don't
like,
have to, it's fine. I just want to know it. I find coloring and
Coloring is always so stuff.
It's so good. Like, oh, like, and seeing teams like so complicated, but with Dooming, it's just like they have highlights and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, like once you put like the base colors, then you do like the basic stuff, like oh yeah, this is gonna be dark ink, this is under out, this is gonna be lighter, because you put on the basic stuff. Once you do that basic stuff, I really can. It starts to look alright. Leaves really kind of like get in dead, like the back part really is like alright, this one's right on this side. So you got the airplane one.
I really wanted to get one, and then I saw this one, but then I also saw that there was one left for the Monster Hunter one, and I was like, I can't pick right now. I've already got the Monster Hunter World art book, and me and my partner share it, so like he's got it at the moment. Like there's so much cool stuff, look at this! But yeah, that's essentially this one. The art is stunning. Every single character, like piece of character art that I've seen is absolutely gorgeous. It's Monster Hunter one. I got too excited and I bought this vampire one. It's gorgeous. See, I love little the calicos. It's my favorite part of the whole game. But see, like, look at the outfits. I freak out whenever I see these. I could not control myself. I had to get it. I know, kitty. I started playing Monster Hunter World. Sorry, that's a lot. I started playing Monster Hunter World, and I named my Palico Spook. I love him. But like, there's so much nice stuff in here. So many cats. I love it. I know. Little helmets, and they have different little armor sets for them and everything. And then there's like weapon sketches as well. There's like heaps in here. It's 400 pages. Oh, I'm definitely going to be doing some more like this. I saw there was one copy left because someone bought the other one, and I was like, I need to get it today or I'm not going to get it. It's, yeah, like I said, 400 pages worth of stuff. Honestly. Oh my god. And I was 83, so a good chunk out of my money. So worth it. I think worth it. It's the fact that it's hardcover as well that I'm like, oh my god, it's so nice. It's not that bad. And then I got this one as well, which has plenty of stuff to study too. So I'm excited. It's weighty, isn't it? If someone tries to rob me, I'd be like, yeah. Get the reach it as well. This one's really nice for poses and gestures. This one's a sketch on my face.
Use a like it's hard to scared, like couple that'll break it.
Yeah, I saw that on Steam. And I feel like the characters like quarterly ones and stuff.
It's hard to like scare them.
Absolutely. I'm going to just so not looking for the black shit over these. Oh, it's just Disney, and they have the oh yeah, you gotta like take the set in. See, look at all the weapons. Weapons, the shields, everything. I love it. Now I'm like, set. I'm set. But I mean, a good chunk out of my bank account, but I think it's really worth it.
because I already bought. I did also get Cinemax out of Overwatch Star Wars Ultimate book, and I got the Art Now Powder book for D&D as well. The Art Now Powder. I need to stop, but it's like it's got a lot about like the older character sheets, the promo art, a lot of the older creature designs, so like the development through the years and everything. I have to play it in one time. Yeah, it's awesome. When I went to Sydney, they had like a massive store there, and they had all the anime like illustration books and everything, all the manga in like the original Japanese print, as well as in the English translation as well, which was really cool. I just feel so much better with hard covers as well, because like there's so much more protection than like all the pages and all the look through it, I don't mind, yeah, go for it. I love the first, yes.
I'm sorry, I won't.
She's struggling.
Oh wow, okay.
Oh no, my bank account is just
Oh, your
gone.
bank.
Oh no. I'm planning like game stuff for the brief.
Yeah.
I'm like scared about that brief so much.
Which option do you think?
I'm thinking of doing either character design or impact, because I think it's like I'm very busy with my own writing, so you know, I think an impact because I missed the last workshop, so I've got to go back and watch it. And it's like, oh yeah, let's talk about the third year project. And it's like, it's gone so fast. I remember, like, I still remember. Yeah. Anything.
We're talking a bit about it, but then the main section after
That's,
be like,
yeah.
oh, but multiple.
2109.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So it's the continuation of 2108.
Is that the one with
Shane and Jason, yeah. It's been really good though. I've had fun in it. We did trick films.
I don't think I've ever had Jason.
He's really nice. Yeah, he's really good at what he does too. He's thorough in everything.
Yeah. Starting now.
Oh, I was just like, is the roof about to cave in?
This is so much.
Yeah.
It smells like
it's metal, but I had friends who did like they did metal work and then after they've done it, come out like,
it smells like something dirty, yes. It's like burnt metal.
yeah, that's what.
We were meant to like, I remember like my school was like the year 8 metal work with like all that kind of stuff. And like,
All right. I think I've got them all there.
and I'm like splitting the wood with this
Could be
chisel,
wrong.
and I had to do that 4 times. The teacher ended up doing it for me. So I was like,
A lot
terrible at it. So I was
stuff.
like, yeah, I totally made this box. Look at it, look how cool it is.
All right. Cool. again, let me know if I miss you in some way, shape, or form. And again, we'll probably have time for some, again, sort of notes in general that, again, sort of TAs can follow up on. And yeah, maybe a couple of sort of more in-depth things. All right. What we'll do is we'll get rid of that on these rendering ones, right? Because again, I feel like when we're rendering, we need to actually see what's there. So again, here, Megan, and I think these are the same ones. It could be, no, I think these are different ones. Yeah, that's Kelly. Cool. Cool. So yeah, so I think these are, again, I think these are Kelly's. Yeah, there we go. I can see it there. Cool. Yeah, so I feel like this is, right, a bit too brushy. Right. Right. Let's get that. And again, I'm sort of seeing here we need let's again avoid these kind of so I think that's just you know, a matter of sort of using templates and Photoshop sort of in a technical way. All right, so again, hopefully that sort of makes sense. You know, I think there's a lot of sort of good stuff sort of happening, right? But more ambient occlusion might help, and right, on simple. Right, so again, there's just a few of those things that I feel like aren't working. Right, we're sort of redoing templates. Things are a little bit messy. Things are a little bit sort of brushy, so we're not sort of using the right sort of tools there. So let's just focus on those basic ones until that is kind of happening, right? I think that'll serve you well, Kelly. With these ones, Megan, again, I think my main sort of comment here was like, again, you know, we could use I feel like blue is not always the best. Yeah. More ambient occlusion on the object. I feel like we could, you know, have a stronger shadow, stronger core shadow, and I think here again we could push here also, you know, I feel like we could focus on add that shadow reflection. Again, similar to what you've got here, right? You sort of have a reflection of that sort of sky. Look at the chrome sort of sphere and see if we can add that sort of stuff. But you know, overall, I think these are looking good. All right, I think you know, this one sort of just looks nice. Again, it's not necessarily that it's the most technically accurate, but I think you've done a nice job of sort of, again, getting that sort of to read. You know, some of these highlights, right, they might be a bit strong, but in general, I think there's some good stuff happening there, right? Yeah, so that's awesome. And we have sort of Andy, and again, I feel like we've got some good results when we're sort of looking, you know, when we're sort of just going directly by that kind of reference. You could add more of the Fresnel effect. Yeah, and here again, more ambient occlusion on object. All right, we've got some of that on the shadow, and we can also right, so again, similar sort of advice. Again, this one seems to be looking pretty good, right? You know, I think you've got a good sort of strong sort of core there. Again, that's very close to that sort of reference, right? So I'm sure that's kind of like helping you. But again, we need more of that sort of ambient occlusion down there. So some cool stuff happening there, but again, keep going with those things, and again, try and catch up as much as you can. Again, I feel like the reflection sort of, you know, gloss sort of thing here is looking really nice. Cool. No worries. All right. So these are Nancy's. Nice. So I feel like, again, we could kind of have, right, more ambient occlusion. And I feel like, you know, just that sort of it's going to probably be the same things, Nancy. I'm going to say, right? I think some of these top right, again, same sort of thing. Here we have unfounded right across right, across the plane. So again, this is a little bit sort of different. Again, like, some of these sort of things are going to work sort of well if you're sort of using this as reference. But again, we don't know precisely exactly what the sort of lighting scenario is there. We could have a local light. In fact, it's likely we have a local light in the studio setup, so you are going to sort of get that gradient. When we're thinking about, again, something that is sort of lit from further away, we're not going to see those kind of like gradients there as much. And again, watch sort of the highlights here. This is a different sort of form, right? This one's very crisp, right? This one's sort of rounded, right? So just pay attention to those differences. I think some sort of stuff that's, is sort of working there. But again, I'd say same thing for the sphere that I'd say for the sort of spheroid sort of egg shape. And again, these, I'd say sort of similar stuff, right? We need, right, more ambient occlusion, right? More core shadow, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd really focus on, right, and again, this is where we actually need a highlight. Right along this edge. That's where the highlight goes. That's where it's really useful. Right. So yeah, few things there. Those things are gonna sort of like help you a little bit. I think this is going in a good direction, but let's just again focus on those sort of basics. I feel like yeah, we're not quite getting, again, strong enough sort of core shadows. We're not getting a lot of reflected light. I think we're getting the texture is looking good, right? And again, with these, I just feel like, again, we could sort of get those sort of basics happening there a little bit stronger. So that's just a few notes for sort of catch up on the material stuff. And yeah, we'll head on to Ferraris. So here, again, I think you've done good notes of process and job sort of showing us how you've sort of gone from like, one stage to another. I think this again is looking like, this looks pretty good. But the main thing I think that we can sort of watch is like, right, let's compare the sort of width here, right? Width versus length versus, right, the kind of, right, sort of length here, right, which kind of seems to sort of, right, so watch the overall. Watch overall proportion. Right. Right, your width versus right, seems off versus the ref, right? I think that's kind of right. That's kind of like affecting things a little bit. Again, I feel like like this stuff feels like you're sort of getting most of this stuff in there, but again, I feel like I want to see that sort of center line a bit more, right? That's something I can sort of see it's sort of there, maybe, but again, I'm not seeing those kind of measurements. So let me know, if they are there. I'm not saying it's sort of way off, but I feel like that's something that we could kind of, right? Look here. right? Because I feel like the center line, again, it's sort of there. But I think that's one of the things that's kind of like affecting our ability to sort of get that sort of width right. So again, seem a bit sort of wide to me. In degree. Right, so I feel like instead of being like that, right, we should be seeing something. Now still, right, we still kind of, I feel like you're getting the right sort of the math right. Yeah, I feel like we're sort of getting the math right that way, right? That's right. But it's a matter of sort of how, right, like how open it is. That's where I feel like, again, we're sort of like a little bit. Right, so again, the overall is kind of right, but the, right, that this sort of angle is kind of wrong, right? Hopefully that makes sense. Now, the trick there is that sort of you've kind of drawn the box. I'm not seeing how you're placing these in the box, right? So these don't seem to be fitting inside the box in any way, shape, or form. Now, one of the best ways to kind of figure out, again, like where that kind of, you know, where that wheel needs to fit is if we look at, I don't know if I sort of go back up here. Again, it's a matter of sort of understanding, like, this is the sort of the width I need, right? This is sort of the height that I need, and you know that's sort of, you know, roughly where that wheel needs to go. So we still pay attention to the, again, the elliptical math, but we use the box to kind of tell us, right, like where that ellipse goes, right? So obviously, you know, if I drew, you know, an ellipse here, I could still draw an ellipse that kind of fits the elliptical math, but it's not really fitting in that box anymore, right? So again, it's not just the elliptical math by itself, it's kind of understanding, like, you know, how a box that is fitting in perspective, right, and is kind of roughly the right sort of width and proportion, right, because that's easy to measure from a box, right? Understanding like how that tells us kind of like what the angle of the ellipse will be, right? So again, the minor axis tells us kind of, you know, how the wheel is sort of, how the ellipse is kind of positioned, right? But the box and the perspective grid kind of tell us, right, whether it's like a high degree or a low degree. Hopefully that makes sense. And all it is there, again, I think that was sort of Marissa's. I think that the thing there is just like, we need a few more things to measure. We might be sort of jumping a little bit ahead there. Yeah, and again, that's sort of one of those things that sort of like happens a lot. So I'd basically just sort of say, and this sort of stuff will apply to most people again, right, is like watch overall proportion. Right, and do a bit more measuring. Right, that's the main thing I feel like we need to do. Most of it's working, right, but it's just like overall proportion is a little bit off. And then when it comes to like, oh, where are these wheels, right? Like where is the box? How high are these wheels? Where are they sitting on the ground? How far are they away from the body? All of those kind of things, I feel like you're just kind of like winging it, just sort of putting them in there a little bit. Yeah, anyway, hopefully that kind of makes sense. Yeah, but and again, we're probably going to need like more sort of detail than that, right? So I know you're just sort of sketching it in, But yeah, good to just, again, do these things with a little bit more accuracy, right? And again, the key things there that we're trying to learn is even, Marissa, I feel like you're doing a good job of understanding how to draw ellipses, but it's the mirroring and the measuring that's kind of a little bit tricky there. Yeah, cool. Thank you. All right. So this is George's, and again, I feel like that's looking very technical, right? I feel like that's kind of working well. Yeah, I'd really like to, right? I really like to find that center. I feel like that center is gonna sort of help you because, again, I'm not 100% sure how you're getting this kind of proportion, right? Are they mirrored? Looks like they can. Yeah, so I know that's there. Yeah, but I'm just like I'm not seeing the measurement there. So are we just sort of guessing where it is, or like that sort of thing, or are we sort of measuring it? Because I'm just not seeing a lot of sort of marks there. So it could be that stuff is sort of you've got extra work there that I'm sort of not seeing. But again, it would be good to be able to sort of see that stuff, know whether, again, are you winging that measurement? Are you just sort of guesstimating it? Are you measuring it? Because again, the only way I think you could measure it properly is if the center line was kind of accurately placed in there. So that's where I'm just like, where's center? How do we know this stuff isn't? It could just be that you've had some layers you've turned off. But again, let me know how that's sort of going. If we look again at that sort of side proportion, again, I think that's kind of could work pretty well. I think you've got a lot of that sort of stuff worked out, but just keep in mind, again, like the height of your sort of square, right? And where that sort of body sort of fits into it, right? Because that will kind of help you a lot, right? So just pay very close attention to where the center of the axle, right? Where the center of that wheel, right? Like where that kind of intersects with the body. And so it's sort of like, where does that go into the body? Right, that's sort of really important. The same thing here, right? Like where does it sort of go into the body? Where is that sort of positioned? I feel like that will work pretty well, but this is, it's sort of looking good. Yeah, cool. So just, again, the only reason I'm saying that is like, if I don't see the center in there, I'm like, again, let me know, George, if that's sort of, if you're just guessing those or whether you've got a line, but I'm like, I want to see the center in there. I want to know that you're sort of doing that because, again, you'll run into trouble if we sort of don't have that center line in there and you're not sort of actually using that to measure. Looks like you've gotten these things pretty accurate to me. Yeah, that looks like it's looking really good. Cool. So this is Michael, again, the daring adventurer. Yeah, I think this is looking good. Yeah, again, George, I'm like, there be dragons, my friend. A bit measuring and guessing. I like your attitude, but that's just, there's a warning shot. If you run into trouble, that could be why, right? Down the line, because we need to know where that center line is, right? We need to be able to measure things like the wing mirrors, right? We need to be able to measure, like where the rims go. You need to be able to measure, again, things like where the wheels are kind of, again, intersecting the body, etc., etc., etc. So the center line is sort of really important. Put that in. it looks like you're doing a good job of guessing, but that's again a normally way to get into trouble. So cool. All right, so Michael here again, sort of jumping ahead. I mean, a lot of this stuff is like looking pretty good to me, and I sort of like what you've got going here. I don't know. I forget whether there was sort of one that was sort of free of all those kind of things. Just watch things like, and this is tricky because it's sort of a bit hard to see, but again, I'm going to say the same thing, right? Let's get center in there. Right, find that center. And another thing that's kind of happening here is again, similar sort of idea where again, we sort of got the ground, but you know, I'm not exactly sure where that sort of ground plane is. Because here it feels like, again, like where's the sort of, let's see if we can get that sort of ground plane measurement in. Because it feels like if I sort of, you know, if I'm sort of finding the center, right, of this, it feels like that doesn't 100% match up with where like the front of your car is, for instance, if that makes sense. Right, so I'm sort of like, does that make sense, Michael? Right, I'm kind of looking at this and I'm like, lots of this stuff is working, right? You're jumping ahead and it's kind of like you're doing a good job with some of these things. But what I'm sort of saying is like, it's kind of where I'm sort of not 100% sure is like, where is this body, right? We've sort of got this, right? But like how far is above the ground is that, right? If we need to draw a shadow in there, right? Like where does that relate to the wheel? Because I'm seeing that you've got that sort of blockiness there, but it's not coming out, right? It's not lining up or coming out that I can see, right, with where that sort of center is. So I feel like you're still kind of just winging it, and you, again, like there's nothing wrong with that. It's just you will, guaranteed, you will reach to a point where it falls down. Right, I mean, it's like gravity; it'll just happen. I mean, I think that's probably worth sort of learning. But again, that's just sort of what I see is like I'm not seeing the preparatory work that's sort of basing that off. I think you're probably pretty good at kind of like winging it and maybe sort of good at sort of drawing those things. But if you can't sort of measure side to side and kind of like understand like what kind of the point is of sort of that stuff, then it's sort of going to be tricky if that makes sense. So again, I'm kind of like, I sort of see that the box there, but I'm like, where does that kind of sit on the ground? Because that box doesn't quite match this one, etc., etc. So again, I'm not 100% seeing it. I'm not seeing the center lines and those kind of things, which will really help you. You know, I mean, it's totally fine to sort of just, you know, have a go at it. But I think what you'll find is that there's going to be like a glass ceiling there when it comes to getting the details right. Yeah, and again, just understand, Michael, like the point is not to kind of be like, oh, look at me, I can sort of do this, and you can sort of eyeball some of it. Like, I know a lot of people would probably draw a better Ferrari if they sort of didn't do this. Not intentionally trying to, no, I think a lot of it is just, and again, I haven't seen a lot of your other work, sort of, Michael, so I don't know, because again, I don't get a chance to see everyone's sort of work until, you know, stuff progresses, and then I slowly get a better idea of who's who. But, you know, often if your drawing is sort of good to begin with, you can wing stuff. You can just be like, well, why am I measuring this when I could just kind of draw it? The problem there is, again, it's sort of you're trying to sort of escape the core kind of concept, which is like measuring it out and stuff, which does take longer. but again, sort of teaches you the things you sort of need to know. Cool, but no, I mean, I think it's looking good. You know, I'm just going to sort of say, yeah, keep going and see how you go with it. Yeah, and just try and find those things, right? Like center line is sort of super important. All these things that I'm sort of saying here are sort of, you know, like key, right? The need to find center on ground plane, right? Need to find that sort of ground plane, understand where those things are. Again, that becomes a lot easier when you, right, need to kind of go and add, right, like where your wing mirrors are and stuff, right? You can kind of just put them in because you sort of can understand where the ground plane is. That's where that stuff becomes important, I guess. Yeah, so again, see how you go. Cool. This is Ella's. Again, I feel like you've done a decent job of sort of roughing that in. And again, I'm sort of seeing the sort of the center and some of those things. I still feel like, again, and let me know, Ella, whether, Ella Dunstone, whether you're kind of like, whether this is sort of your final drawing or whether you're kind of roughing it in. I feel like some of these sort of marks are, again, still a little bit rough, right? What we need to do is, again, sort of find that center. We need to find, again, those sort of contours, right? We need to sort of understand how those things are sort of going, how that stuff sort of relates to the ground plane, right? So it's sort of, again, you know, it's the same stuff we sort of did with the boat, right? We kind of need to understand the cross section. And once you put the cross section in, what you find is, again, like finding out, it's very easy to, you know, if you have two cross sections in, right, and you kind of know where the center is, right, you've sort of got a very good rough understanding of structure at that point. And that is where, you know, you can sort of start to wing in a few lines, right, to sort of be like, well, you know, there might be sort of one there, I can kind of see that sort of looks right, and then you can put in, right, your kind of, you know, other little bits and pieces and all those kind of things. But if we don't have those cross sections, right, it's very difficult to know where to place things, right? The mirrors here are a good example, right? You're sort of, we've done a decent job of sort of putting that in. What we really need to do is sort of find out like where the center is, right? Like where is this positioned on the ground plane, right? Where is this mirror on the ground plane? We then need to mirror the mirror across the center line, right? Sort of, again, sort of, you know, draw it up, right? Find it over there and sort of put it in. And that's kind of how we, you know, do that. Again, I'm just doing that diagrammatically, but, you know, need to find center and contour sections of the body. Yeah, so just like, again, you know, that sort of stuff will help us mirror those sorts of things. But I think a lot of this is working well. I can see you doing the work there. I think that's sort of working nicely. Again, I feel like we might be having a similar sort of thing that I was sort of talking about before, where, right, you've kind of got the, right, you've got the box here, and this is kind of fitting in. This one, I don't feel like, I'm like, I think I've got the right box there, right? But I don't feel like, that's fitting. The box correctly. So again, remember we sort of talked a lot about, you know, that sort of side of it and how that sort of functions, right? So we need to make sure all of those sort of things are kind of happening. Again, here I've got my sort of rough sort of center line, right? And I feel like we're going to need, again, a very similar sort of shape, but I feel like we're just not sort of tilting it at the right angle. Cool. So you're saying the one below has in the right lines. yeah, that looks like it's sort of fitting better. Again, I think that's like pretty sort of good. But yeah, I feel like the here, right, I don't feel like we're sort of quite, right, we're quite making those ellipses fit, right? So, right, the elliptical. Bit off still. And again, that's just the same thing. You need to fit the box, but the box might not be 100%. This one's kind of looking okay. Again, I'm just sort of expecting, right, I'm expecting a little bit more of a sort of a tilt, right? And so that just sort of means that, right, this, right, it's probably going to sort of come in there a little bit more, right? Just be a little bit more tilted. Yeah, so just check that, and you can sort of see here, again, this one doesn't look too bad, right? But these ones are looking a bit sort of distorted. Right, I feel like we should have something a little bit more like that. Again, I'm not being sort of 100%. And right, so just the width of the the wheel, and I think that's the same for the front. Right. So again, just sort of basic sort of notes there that sort of might help. Yeah, but I mean, I think most people, again, I can see, like Ella, like you're putting in the work, you're doing stuff. It's sort of, like some of it's sort of working. Just keep in mind those basic things, right? I think these things are kind of looking good, right? You're getting that sort of replication. Some of this stuff looks maybe like, again, we could sort of apply, right, a bit more sort of perspective to this, but a lot of it's actually looking really good, right? Yeah, just understand, probably again, we're going to need to do another sort of detail pass to make sure that just, right, you're getting all those sort of structures in there. Yeah, cool. Again, it's an iterative process, so I think it's good to put those rougher lines in there to figure it out, but yeah, we will need to sort of get it sort of happening. Again, so yeah, good luck with that. Bronte. Cool. Right, this one's a nice angle. Right, but a bit distorted. Right, and foreshortening. So yeah, again, I feel like, something like this would work. Again, we just need to sort of place it right, like in a, actually, so it's sort of a bit more sort of tilted, right? It needs to be sort of tilted a little bit better. Yeah, but I think these are looking good. Again, maybe a little bit sort of gestural, right? We need to sort of get some of that sort of structure right. I feel like this is sort of looking a little bit better. Yeah. Yeah, so anyway, let me know if that sort of helps. I pick one of those and sort of keep going. Samuel here. Again, nice sort of angles. Most of these will kind of work sort of okay. Again, I feel like, again, something sort of basic, right? Like sort of 6, or again, like 4 might work, except again, you're drawing the back, which is kind of okay. But yeah, all of these kind of, basic sort of angles will sort of work. If in doubt, right, just think about the easiest way to kind of do this is just get that kind of basic, right, 3/4. Right, that'll sort of be easiest or simplest. Yeah, but I mean, I think that's sort of the angle's sort of cool there, right? Nice. All right. Cool. Okay, let's take a break, and we'll come back and sort of go through some of the rest of them. Again, what you'll probably find is like a lot of the things I'm going to say are going to be sort of simple, right? It's like the ellipses are still off. Let's find center. A lot of those kind of advices, are things that I've sort of put in here. So if you're in doubt, right, just double check this and just like, let's make sure that we're sort of, getting that sort of stuff perfect. And I'd sort of probably add to that. I don't know whether I sort of put that there. Right, because that stuff can be a real sort of trap. But yeah, let's take a quick break and we'll come back probably around sort of 11:30 and we'll sort of go through the rest of these. But yeah, it's good stuff so far, everyone. Nice work. Just keep going. Got to keep progressing. Again, these things do get there in the end. But yeah, this is a really rough sort of stage of it, right? Where kind of like you put in a lot of effort and it still just looks like a bucket of lines. But yeah, we'll catch you. Come back in about sort of 5 or 10. We'll keep going.
Was this the teacher's timeline? I'm just figuring it out, like the values and stuff. Like I'm trying to get the photos. It's just like
I'm like,
You got like 2 more classes and you got 5.
yeah. I'm like 4 weeks behind in this class as well. Yeah, it's a lot. It's like, I think it's because it's like, usually there's like one-on-one mentorship. Really other subjects. So it's like, that's in all of one. But he doesn't think it's that much, but it is. Yeah. Oh well. I mean, like, I'm learning a lot from him, so. Week 4 is, yeah, so it's like competitions and stuff. So, for example, week 4 is 1 page of value studies, basically a chef's out. And 1 page of reps, like 4 to, I was saying, 1 to 2 artworks with imagination, applying the studies to the concepts, values 4 to 5 times, 1 page of composition sketches, and 1 page of value sketches. That's just for 1 week. It's insane. And then the week after that, 1 page of abstract color palette, 3 artworks with black and white color, 1 page of color palette with hand stamps, 3 artworks of extracting colors from reference. Insane. Yeah. I think it's fine though because he doesn't give feedback in standard checkpoints.
So he has to give it.
He hasn't given any feedback. Yeah. I don't think it's yeah, he's got a demo and outfit. He's like, you should put on the one word that's cool, and I'm like, oh. There's feedback for like, it's something that I was like,
You're like, it's better.
well, I don't know, I think it's like, I'm glad that he's not doing feedback because I'm behind my work. It's better if he did feedback because
So then they can see where you guys are at and how much you should
but like we did make like a Discord and we can like just post stuff on like for every week. So yeah, and then like if you have like issues with the running like issues with the problems like we've gone to the Discord. Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah.
Because I feel like Britman Rock and Mars are kind of.
I think he uses. I'm not sure. I think he uses 30 codes, which is like 30 stuff like that. But the 3 artworks you can drop on the line drop. I'm not sure. And also because I'm but he has like I don't know. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's big deal.
That's actually one of my favorites. I think it suits them.
Or like just American people, like just basically America. Yeah. Yeah, well, they don't really work. Alien space.
It is a lot.
Sci-fi.
I'm not gonna lie.
It's so mad at everyone. Everyone. I don't want to. I don't work. I mean, everyone's got their opinion. I respect.
What do you think of this
But
dress?
oh, that's awful.
That was
beautiful.
I feel like the color kind of. I feel like it would have gone for the color. We didn't put the makeup and it was older, but I think it was nice. It made it look really pretty. Yeah.
I like this one. This is what I like about it. I like this. I feel like, but this would have. I should feel like that. This should have been the family and like for feminine fashion. I don't know.
He said it was good looking.
Did you see that photo of like 6 people and they're all wearing like a black tuxedo with a black tie?
That was so much there. Like, they could have done so much, but I feel like like yeah, they could have done so much. But what was the thing? It was like American in general and like fashion. And like just anything to represent American people. And like the diversity and stuff like that. And super touch like the relationship. So it's just like
I haven't seen it. I think I've seen like a couple of.
yeah, it's everything in stunning.
I haven't
It was
seen
very
that.
Think about how much that dress
yeah, I think that's exactly on the website. I'm very waiting to see more. Same with polish.
Oh, I love this. I love this. Look on the arts to a style. Oh, I love that.
Who else is there? I think it was Kim Kardashian. She was like a mentor for her
Yeah,
dad.
what's
Like,
the-
yeah. I knew that was.
Why is ASAP Rocky wearing a robe?
Wait, let me see. I think I can get.
What is this? He's literally wearing a robe.
It looks like something is purple.
Rihanna's going on for
Yeah, I love her.
I love her.
Lil Nas X is my favorite though.
Is
Because
that
he had the three
wearing, like,
pieces, the cape, and then it was like the plated armor, and then he stripped it off the bodysuit.
I like the
I loved it.
Oh, is that why you had to make an outfit?
Yeah.
Okay. This one's wearing like crazy eyelashes.
No.
What is that?
I don't know.
Why is she
Don't
wearing
think how looks like a lunch. That was great. Some of them were nice, but I feel like they all love that. That dress was quite I love that fit.
She's pretty.
I think it was her auntie came over and bought like all these, she had contacts, bought all these garments from like her culture and everything, and they had like boxes and boxes of them to go with the dress.
Yeah, and you might like spend most, you might end up spending most of your time
Yeah, it's kind of boring.
It's kind of like same old, yeah. Like,
so,
oh,
so that they're able to
it's like it's supposed to be jacket. Show that
My body
nice
proportions.
top. It looks nice, yeah. Very
like
long
recently
size.
I kind of wanted to
Pop over the button.
and get to
Yeah, me too.
I don't know how to speak.
so
Yeah, it's a bit same. It's like, oh yeah, this
That's
is
the
good.
easiest.
I don't know shit else.
He looks strange. It looks like his face is photoshopped.
He looks like Slender Man.
Yeah.
He looks like Slender Man.
That's so weird.
I think that's a good angle. If you want to,
Like some
like,
of
if
it
you
was
want to
straight
go
up
down.
weird, and then other bits are like, wow, that's really extra.
I like that person's dress.
Oh yeah, yeah.
When I say social, like,
It's like I get it, but it's not that tight.
when I said like,
What is that?
touching
Yeah, what is
and
that?
stuff,
It looks kind of cool, but I don't know what it is.
now it's just
Like a lot, I think Met Gala is just like a thing where celebrities like wear like
so
Famous designer brands, yeah.
compared to
not
this,
like brands, but just like
my
pieces that
first
are
impression
made.
was I feel like the painter.
Like a lot of the time, the artists like work with the celebrity.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No.
The artist wants to not really work with
I still think back to like Ariana Grande's like Cinderella dress.
That's now it's just about like, yeah, you know what I mean? Like,
That's
it's-
intense.
That has nothing to
proportion
do
is
with
tweaking
that.
it now.
I don't understand.
Because it's good angle and it's just slowly going up and stuff. Yeah. That's basically.
What
Um,
is it? Right, that looks like dummy.
Just leave the door
Like,
open.
what
Lewis,
about
Lewis, Duncan. Can you just leave the door open? Just like put it. I don't know who closed it there. It's broken. Cool. Thanks, man.
More like the people that I know aren't as perfect.
All right, I'm back. So again, I forget whose these were exactly. Remember we were sort of talking about it. But yeah, I feel like here, yeah, I'd like to see a little bit more center line, right? Same sort of thing. I feel like we sort of blocked out where those things kind of sit. But again, we need to make sure that the drawing that we're kind of doing, it needs to kind of fit right within that, right? So it's not just a matter of sort of like drawing out the width, it's a matter of sort of measuring out the width. Right, making sure that's sort of accurate. And if we're gonna have wheels that are that sort of length, right, they're gonna actually be like quite, right? We're gonna have a wheel that's a little bit more like that, I think. And that's just again, that's just a rough sort of estimate, right? But again, if we sort of had little wheels like this, you can see that the box that's going to take up is going to be a little bit smaller. So check those proportions. I remember there was some sort of feedback sort of given there. I think it was maybe this stuff that sort of Duncan was sort of giving you feedback on. So yeah, pay attention to that as much as possible, right? Like you've got that sort of situation of a proportion on the ground, but just pay attention to, again, like how big the wheel is, right, from sort of top to bottom. Again, you know, measure out all of those things, right? I feel like some of that stuff kind of just isn't quite there yet, right? Like how big is that wheel, right? So let's sort of find that. Right, how tall are the wheels? Oh, so I think again, like, you know, we can get this proportion and you can sort of find that sort of ground plane sort of stuff. But again, let's right, find center. Let's get all those things happening. I feel like we're still not quite there with the elliptical wheel arrangement, right? Again, keep in mind, right, that's your minor axis, right? Again, your major axis. So I think, again, we're going to have something that's a little bit more, right? A little bit more like that. But I think I just feel like some of this sort of stuff, this some of this stuff is maybe getting sort of lost on the, in the process of sort of, you know, worrying about everything else. So often it's easy to, again, forget some of those sort of things. I think the ellipses here, again, sort of looking a little bit better, right? Again, that's the sort of thing that you sort of had sort of previously. So again, not sure whether we're trying to sort of replicate that or get those sort of proportions, but let's make sure we double check those things going forward, get all of that sort of stuff right. Again, Aaron, as I said, this is looking good. All right, I think we just need more ground plane. Right. You know, right, and finding center. That sort of stuff. So again, it feels like, again, you've got a really good sort of sense of the general sort of proportion, but I'm not seeing kind of, again, these sort of boxes, right, that that are going to sort of tell us, again, like, where is that sort of connecting to the ground, right? Where is that kind of axle, right? Where is the, right, where is that ground plane? Where does that axle sort of join with the car? It's all those little details that we kind of need right? We need that kind of the ground plane for, again, to sort of measure those things, get the distances, find that center, right? It's that ground plane stuff that, again, I'm not quite sort of seeing. Again, it feels like it sort of is, you know, we've got some of that kind of there. But again, let's just double, triple sort of check. Because again, where that ground plane is going to define how far and where the where those kind of wheels sort of intersect that car. So yeah, let's get that sort of sorted, right, as much as possible. Because again, if the center line is sort of off, right, if that's kind of not 100% there, right, got that kind of line, then again, what we'll kind of find is, again, those kind of measurements are not quite sort of right. But it overall, it looks good, right? So again, I'm sort of, I'm not saying like you're on the wrong track. I'm just like, make sure all of those things are kind of working, because it would be difficult to kind of add details to that going forward and kind of have them really work. Cool. So this is Seska, and again, I feel like overall, right, right, right. So it basically just seems like this, like if we look at this distance, so right, so is but Seska, because you've actually put in the center, right, and because it looks like you've actually sort of put in these different measurements, I can easily tell you where you're going wrong, and that's why we sort of do this, because I suspect maybe what is sort of where we're sort of, you know, finding a little bit of trouble is just that, again, I feel like these wheels, even these ones are probably like a little bit sort of wide, but that's kind of okay, right? You know, that's not the worst thing. But these ones are getting like even wider still. And all that's happened is just in mirroring, right, sort of this dimension over here, maybe we just haven't been as accurate as possible. Let me know what you think. But what I would imagine is if I...
Yeah, maybe as well, Tim, you can even go over the mirroring, like how you're showing to do with the plane. You know, I feel like people have forgotten that because it was a long time ago.
Yeah. Yeah, so if we look at kind of how, you know, I can sort of check that, right? Again, we got that kind of center line here. Right, so this sort of square here that I'm sort of putting in, that's sort of ground plane that I'm sort of seeing. And the width, if I sort of look at it, right, like that's where that sort of center line is. And it sort of looks like it's kind of there, something like that. So immediately I'm kind of seeing that, like, just visually, this doesn't seem like it kind of matches that stuff that well, right? And if we kind of look at sort of, right, that distance versus that distance, again, that seems like even more a little bit off. And so again, what we can do is we can use, again, the idea of these sort of large sort of planes to help us with that. So the idea here, again, I'm sort of going roughly that. Let's sort of see. All right, I've sort of got lines here, lines here. Those are pretty similar. All right, I'm imagining again that grid is going to be something like that. Right, and again, I can use just one of these lines here to put in that. And so you can see, again, I basically got this is my center line, right? This is the object, and I want to mirror that across. So there's lots of ways I can do that, but again, this is one of the things you run into. There's already a lot of stuff here, right? So that can get confusing. Now, you can just do it on another layer, and once you kind of get the measurement, you can just forget about it. Or we can use the idea of sort of just a secondary plane. It can even be in a different dimension that we use to kind of mirror. Again, all we need to do is find the center of this, and we take that across. All right, and now I've got my sort of center point, and now I'm going to go through there, and I'm actually going to take it from this side as well to just sort of double check. And now if I kind of, I can kind of assume those are not quite lining up 100%. What I might do again is just make sure that's sort of correct. That's kind of correct. Let's double check. I feel like, again, that's not. That could be a little bit more accurate. Going through there. Again, you have to be sort of, a little bit accurate here. But again, if I sort of double check it by going both ways. 1, 2, all right, and then we try and sort of join those up. Yeah, that's pretty close. I think it's going to be somewhere there. And so that is a more accurate mirror of this distance over here, right? Because I'm using, again, a larger sort of object. What does that mean, right? It means if I'm sort of mirroring, again, this distance from here, right? And now I get this distance from here, right? What you will kind of find is that, right, that is where that line should be. That makes sense? So we should get something a little bit more like that, which kind of gives us, again, a shorter dimension that way. But Seska, because you put in all of the stuff, that's super easy for me to do. And because you know where all that stuff is, that's super easy for you to kind of go in there and look at and correct. And that's why, again, it's good to put in centerline, put in all those constructions, because it makes your understanding of it and my understanding of it a lot easier. So that seems to be the sort of the error there, is maybe either eyeballing that or just using something that's maybe not as accurate as it could be. And we always just want to sort of think about, again, where the center is. Typically what we're doing is we're kind of defining proportion in sort of a part of the image that's very close to us, easy for us to assess. And then we're actually mirroring those proportions, right, to the far sort of sides. And that's why the center line is so important, right? Yeah, but cool. I think it looks good. Keep going. Just keep adjusting those things. See what the wheels look like. Cool. All right. Here is, again, I forget whose these were. Yeah, I think this is sort of looking cool. Again, I kind of like sort of pick one like this. Right? Let's, again, pay attention to overall proportion. Yeah, cool. So again, keep going with that. This one by sort of Ashley. I feel like, again, this is sort of looking pretty good. But again, I can't see the center, right? Right, again, show me the center. Because again, that makes it very difficult to kind of tell like what's going on here. Where is that ground plane? I can see some of it's there, but right. I feel like, again, the sort of, here we've got the sort of width. The wheel is off here. So again, just that kind of like basic measurement. And that's where it's really good to put in, right, those sort of ground plane measurements so we can sort of look at it. Right, but again, that's why we sort of do this box sort of thing here, right, to make sure that the wheel here, right, is the same as the wheel here. Right, that's why we go to all that sort of fuss, right, to make sure this wheel is the same as that. Again, not quite seeing that here. It feels like I can see that some of that sort of happened right under there. I can kind of see those boxes. It seems like that one got a bit sort of squished there. So. Yeah, overall, again, lots of stuff sort of looking good. I feel like this is maybe meant to be, again, that sort of seat there, but also just understand, again, that it is quite low, right? If you watch sort of like where, right, for instance, you know, the top of the cockpit, right, is pretty much in line with the wheels, right? And this thing just pops out a little bit above, right? So what does that mean? Well, it means, again, the actual sort of car, for the most part, right, is sort of lower than the wheels, right? And again, the bit where the driver sits is kind of, you know, again, in line with the wheels, and that sort of bit, the backrest sort of roll cage thing, right? It's just a little bit, so this looks a bit high. So, you know, just sort of, you know,
Just also, Tim, while you're writing that, I've got a little note, kind of a note to everyone is like, as well, like, don't wing your grids, guys, either, right?
Yeah.
You should have it by now where you all have a Photoshop file that is the Kona Vision with a perspective grid on there, and then you never have to do it again, ever. I don't know if I think I've told you guys this many times, all right? Make one grid, you never have to do it again ever. Like the grid doesn't change whenever you draw stuff. It's just your picture plane that can change on where you want your vanishing points to be, right? But just do up a grid, and then you've got one, and then you can just open it up whenever you're like drawing stuff for the rest of your life, right? So yeah, because one, you just, like for example, Ashley, in your case, one, you just wasted time drawing out a grid, like 10 minutes of your life doing that, and two, it's not very good. So it makes you like, it just makes everything wonky, all right? So yeah, spend the time, just draw out one grid, save it out as a Photoshop file, get it right, and then you never have to do it again, right?
Yep. Yeah, so again, look at, pay attention here to sort of just how we sort of transition, right, from sort of one wheel ellipse to the other, right? This is actually quite a challenging thing. But again, you kind of see again that, you know, these wheels aren't, it's not 100%, you know, just one cylinder, right? It's almost kind of like, if you look at it from the side, right? It's kind of it's like one cylinder here, right? One cylinder here, and then it's like extra for the cylinders, right? It sort of has like a profile. So that's one of those things that a lot of people sort of end up doing, right? Is sort of drawing in sort of additional sort of ellipses, right? To sort of show that sort of form. Again, that's not something you need to do, but just keep in mind, again, as we sort of round that over, we want sort of transitions. But yeah, I feel like this is sort of good, right? We also need Photoshop. Wrong button. We need a bit more. There we go. Right, so same thing for all of these other things, Ellie, right? We need sort of, you know, that sort of structure around there, as I was sort of saying, right? We need center. Need to know, again, like where the center is there, right? We need to know what the contour is, where the center of the contour is, right? Where the cross sections of the contour are. That way it's very easy, again, to kind of trace around, right, create structure that we can use, right, to line these things up, right, create basically grids, right, across these kind of curved surfaces, so that again we can kind of place things symmetrically across, right? So that's sort of what we need there. And again, just like more refinement. Right. Yeah. So, but I think this is looking really good. You know, again, off to a really, really awesome start. That's all, you know, looking pretty good to me. Cool. This is Caitlin's. And again, you know, sort of looking at this sort of stuff, this looks pretty good to me. I'm not seeing the center. I don't know whether you put it in because it looks like a lot of this stuff is solid. You know, I think it's kind of looking good. But again, you know, I feel like Sethka's is a really good example. This one looks good too, right? But it's, you know, it's a little bit off. And the only way we kind of figure out that it's off is by, again, having centerline, figuring out how far we've mirrored, and just being like, oh, we've got a small error here. Cool, we'll correct it. Here, again, I can't quite see whether that's sort of been mirrored. It feels like, again, you've sort of like broken this up, and that's sort of looking pretty cool, right? But again, it would be good to kind of see the center, see that that's sort of been mirrored. But yeah, I mean, overall, I feel like that's looking pretty solid. You know, say, you know, keep going. Let's just find. Right, keep going. Yeah, nice one. Cool. I think that was sort of Michael's sort of other version of that. Again, I think we sort of talked about that. Cool. So yeah, Alia's nice. Proportions are a little bit off, but I feel like, again, you know, just like this feels a little bit sort of squished. But I think overall, this is looking really solid. Right. Again, from a, you know, I feel like sort of something like this would work. Totally up to you. But yeah, nice work. Again, you know, just feels like, again, I can see that structure. I can see you sort of doing that, which is awesome. So yeah, I'd say keep going. I feel like, you know, that sort of standard 3/4 is going to be the best, but, you know, you can pick something else if you sort of want. Right, you know, that would sort of work too. Yeah, and again, I think this is sort of Kelly's sort of one. I feel like we sort of talked about that with some of those other ones as well. I forget, but yeah, I feel like the thing here is just, you know, let's find, right? The ground. Right, where are these things? I still feel like this, again, you know, this looks like these ellipses are kind of working okay, right? But again, just let's join them up. Right, smooth transition you can see here as well, right? Just not quite there, and I feel like it's because, again, these things feel like they're not quite placed 100% sort of, right, as if they're sort of fitting the grid. Right, so we've sort of got grid here, right, sort of grid here. Again, it just sort of doesn't feel like we're sort of drawing. Right, so watch the top, right, just make sure all of that sort of stuff is accurate. Make sure, again, right, you know, you're sort of drawing this, but let's make sure that, again, this line side to side is kind of also going with the perspective. So I feel like there's just a few things like that are not quite sort of sorted out, right? But overall, again, the proportion is kind of, you know, right, is looking pretty good. Yeah, so keep going. And I'm sure like TAs can sort of help you out with some of that stuff. Yeah, but yeah, just watch some of those things. You know, I feel like some of it's getting a little bit sort of out of hand. Let's find that sort of ground plane, right? Do the measuring, make sure that's kind of working. Like again, just this, right? Like this one here just seems a little bit little bit sort of off, right? Yeah, this ellipse feels a little bit off. So yeah, check that out. Maybe jump on Discord, see if you can get some of that sort of stuff happening. This is Daniela's, and again, I feel like this is where I'm getting like sort of lost, because I'm like, did you go over Daniela's before with sort of a different one? I forget, or maybe that was sort of the one that sort of.
I think you were talking about it like at the start.
Yeah.
In flow.
So, yeah. So again, I'm going to say the same thing, right?
I think Daniela knows some things to do now.
Yeah, you've got the basic idea. I feel like you've got some good sort of feedback, right? Right, and I think we need to sort of, right?
Yeah, is everyone seeing how like just breaking everything down, just measuring those things out, just really going like, how does the box work, you know, around the outside of my wheels, you know, between the wheels, how can I measure that across? Like there's always a simple way to solve everything. Like it's just perspective, it's just boxes. There's like an easy way to find every solution. You just got to kind of like think outside the square a little bit sometimes, right? No pun intended. But yeah, so it's just setting all those things up, right?
Yeah, and I think here again we can just sort of see like this ellipse. I'm not 100% sure that this ellipse is like, you know, on the right sort of axis and stuff. But what I'm sort of seeing here is just like, you know, this ellipse that we've kind of drawn here is not really like a duplicate of this one, right? It's kind of like a different sort of thing. So you're getting this sort of like, you know, like this ellipse and this thing don't seem to match up 100%. So let's just kind of, you know, make sure that sort of stuff is sort of sorted, right? You know, watch elliptical math. Yeah, and you know, again, I think that's the last one. That's sort of most of those sort of things. Sort of, again, at least I've given you some directions that you can sort of ask TAs about, and TAs can kind of look at this and maybe help you guys with those things. But you kind of see again, it's a similar set of things that tend to go wrong. We sort of talked about them a lot, you know, and I sort of mentioned them in this sort of class. So yeah, just make sure those things are sort of happening. I think it's also really important. I think, Simon, the most important thing to note is like, I think often if people are drawing a little bit simply and, you know, that we're like, you know, maybe, you know, we're not sort of putting in the center line and doing the measuring. It's kind of like before you go and add all the detail, it doesn't seem like those things matter much, right? But when you do add the detail in, you just find that it completely torpedoes any ability you have actually placing those things in, right? Because once you sort of start to add the suspension components, and then you're like, well, now it's really obvious that the wheel isn't placed in the right spot. Does that make sense? Because like the axle is just not actually contacting the body in the right position, right? It becomes really, really obvious. And the other thing is, again, you know, I keep sort of pointing it out because I feel like it's a great example, is sort of Seska's one, which again is like, you know, 95% accurate and doing all the right things, but just like that one little, you know, like small error, you know, just makes this wheel look like noticeably too wide. And I think often if people aren't putting in this amount of sort of complexity to their construction, this is what we sort of need. But if people aren't doing this, then they kind of feel like these things don't matter, right? Because it's like, oh, this wheel just looks a bit funny because maybe I just drew it a bit funny. I'll just kind of fudge it there. It's like, no, it's because we're not doing this basic stuff, right? And, you know, once you actually do all this, you kind of realize, you know, it's actually, you know, the accuracy is even more important, right? So I feel like there's often a little bit of a, you know, people aren't quite getting how important that stuff is because, you know, if you're just doing it sort of a bit sketchier or a bit simpler and you're kind of like, oh, I'll just kind of fudge it. Yeah, once we add the details, it becomes harder and harder and harder and harder and harder to do that, right? And yeah, the more realistic you make it, the more obvious it becomes if like a wheel is in the wrong spot, right? So it's easier to kind of be like, oh, that's kind of cool because I've just got, again, my sort of simple Ferrari thing going now, and it's a little bit off, but it'll be okay. It's like, I don't know, once you start drawing everything there, it's just going to look more and more weird if the proportions are off. So really, really important to get that sort of stuff here, because that concept carries through with everything, with all art you do. If you don't get the basics down initially, you often find you sort of get stuck in the mud later on, right? Where you're like, why doesn't this look right? Okay, it's the same stuff here. I almost guarantee you the mistakes you're making here with this stuff are metaphorically, right, sort of translating and kind of literally, but you know, on a large scale, the same sort of things you tend to do, like not doing this construction at the beginning, or you know, kind of whatever it is you're doing here, it's very likely that's happening in your own work as well, right? Yeah, it's rare that we kind of find people who just like really suck at this, but somehow are like sort of doing amazing stuff everywhere else, right? Yeah, you know, it's typically, it's all the same. So important to see it here. This shows you where it is. That's the best thing. It shows you, because we can't escape out of it. Anyway, that's all I got for today. I guess you guys have a couple of weeks to kind of catch up on this a bit and get this stuff sorted. So we'll see you after the break, and we'll keep going.
Okay, sounds good. See you, everyone.
Cool. Good luck. We'll see you in a few weeks.
Thanks, Tim.
No worries.